She came back from the dead widowed with a child. The Duke who'd mourned her wasn't ready for this. Before we begin this beautiful period romance story, tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I love knowing where you're joining us from. And subscribe if you love romantic stories like this. Now, let's fall into this tale together. London smelled different. Evelyn Ashcroft drew a breath and tried to find something familiar in the scent of damp leaves and overturned earth that rose from Kensington Gardens. 5 years. 5 years since she had walked these gravel paths, since she had heard the genteel murmur of London society drifting between carefully manicured trees. Everything seemed smaller than she remembered. "Mammy, look!" The bright voice pulled her back. Flora crouched beside the path, small fingers reaching toward a stubborn cluster of late autumn daisies that refused to acknowledge the cold creeping through the air. "They're lovely, aren't they?" Evelyn knelt beside the child, ignoring the dampness seeping into her grey skirt. London ladies didn't kneel in the dirt, but then Evelyn was no longer quite a London lady, was she? Flora touched the white petals with something close to reverence. Her red hair, so unlike Evelyn's darker brown, caught the fading sunlight and turned to flame. "Can I pick one?" The girl looked up with those wide brown eyes that knew nothing of cruelty yet. "Just one, darling, but choose carefully." While Flora deliberated with the seriousness of a judge selecting a verdict, Evelyn let her gaze drift across the garden. Others walked here too. An elderly woman with 3 small dogs straining at their leads, a cluster of young ladies giggling behind painted fans, a nursemaid pushing a perambulator with the resigned expression of the perpetually exhausted. No one recognized her. Why would they? Evelyn Ashcroft was dead, had been dead for 5 years, her name printed in neat rows among the lost, murmured over at memorial services, quietly erased from social registries. The woman who had returned was a stranger. "I'm ready, Mammy." Flora held up her chosen daisy like a trophy, beaming. Evelyn forced a smile and took the child's free hand. "Shall we walk a bit more before it gets dark?" The path led them deeper into the park, where the trees grew more dense and the sounds of the city faded to a distant hum. Evelyn felt the weight of the mourning brooch at her collar, small and discreet, but present. Owen had been dead 6 months. 6 months since she'd closed his eyes for the last time, since she'd made that promise at his bedside. "Protect my Flora." She squeezed the small hand in hers a bit tighter. "Mammy, you're hurting." "Sorry, sweet." Evelyn loosened her grip, heart clenching. That was when she saw him. A man walked toward them along the narrow path. Tall, broad-shouldered beneath a dark coat, cut with the precision that spoke of Savile Row and old money. He seemed lost in thought, gaze fixed on some distant point, hands clasped behind his back in a posture that was achingly, impossibly familiar. The setting sun caught his profile for just a moment. Evelyn stopped breathing. No, it couldn't be. But it was. Even after 5 years, even with his face leaner and harder, with new lines of tension bracketing his mouth, she would know those eyes anywhere, would know the way he held himself, the particular tilt of his head when he was thinking. James Rothwell, Duke of Rothwell, the man she had loved, the man who had promised endless love and mere weeks after her death was engaged to another woman. He hadn't seen her yet, was still 20 paces away, absorbed in whatever thoughts occupied dukes who had everything and had lost nothing. Evelyn had 20 paces to decide, turn and flee, lower her face and pass him like a stranger. Flora tugged her hand. "Mammy, why did we stop?" The child's voice carried on the still air, and James Rothwell looked up. For a moment, a single moment suspended like a drop of water before it falls, neither of them moved. Evelyn watched recognition hit him like a physical blow, saw his eyes widen, saw all the color drain from his face, saw his entire body go rigid as if he'd been struck by lightning. She watched his lips form a word, her name, but no sound came out. The world continued around them, birds singing their evening songs, leaves falling in lazy spirals, London breathing its eternal breath, but between Evelyn Ashcroft and James Rothwell, there was only silence. Silence and 5 years of unburied dead. Flora tugged her skirt. "Mammy, who is that man?" Evelyn couldn't answer, because James had started walking toward them, slowly, like a man approaching an apparition that might vanish if he moved too quickly, like a man who had seen a ghost and couldn't quite believe it was real. And Evelyn, widow of Owen McAllister, mother to Flora, woman who had survived the sea and amnesia and heartbreak, stood perfectly still. There was nowhere to run. Not this time. He stopped 3 paces away, close enough that she could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes that hadn't been there before. Close enough to see that those green eyes, God, those eyes held something that looked like devastation. Evelyn. Not a question, an accusation, a confirmation, a prayer. Her throat had gone tight. She forced words past it. Your Grace, formal, distant, as if they were strangers meeting at a garden party. Flora pressed against her skirts, suddenly shy. The girl had good instincts, could sense the tension radiating between the adults like heat from a fire. James looked at the child. Something shifted in his expression, something Evelyn couldn't quite read. Confusion, pain, both. He dragged his gaze back to her face. You're alive, as you can see. The words came out sharper than she'd intended. She watched him flinch, almost imperceptibly. 5 years. His voice had gone rough. 5 years, Evelyn. Yes, 5 years. Louder now, the control cracking. I thought you were dead. Everyone thought. Flora whimpered softly. The girl was frightened. Evelyn's instincts kicked in immediately. She scooped the child into her arms, held her close, protective. The gesture seemed to break something in James. He stepped back as if she'd slapped him. Who? He had to stop, clear his throat. Who is she? Evelyn met his eyes and made a choice. Not the truth. Not yet. Let him wonder. Let him hurt the way she had hurt. That, she said coolly, is not your concern. Wrong answer. She saw the fury kindle in him, hot and bright. Not my concern. A laugh with no humor in it. You vanish for 5 years. Let the entire world believe you drowned. And now you return with a child, and I'm not allowed to ask. Your Grace, please. She kept her voice low, trying not to frighten Flora further. You're scaring her. Where were you? He took a step closer. And where the hell were you, Evelyn? Scotland. Doing what? Living. With whom? She said nothing. Let the silence answer. His jaw clenched. With whom? Evelyn. She lifted her chin, met his gaze squarely, and drove the blade home. With my husband. The word landed like a stone into still water. She watched the ripples spread across his face. Shock, disbelief, something that looked dangerously like anguish. He couldn't seem to finish the sentence. Late husband, she clarified, voice steady even as her heart hammered against her ribs. He passed 6 months ago. James stared at her, at Flora, back at her. The calculations happening behind his eyes were almost visible. You married. Not a question. A statement of fact, hollow and distant. Yes, and had a daughter. Evelyn didn't correct him. Let him believe what he would. Let him think she had moved on, built a life, forgotten him entirely. Congratulations, he said finally. The word was ice. I hope you were very happy. He turned to leave. James. It's your grace to you, Mrs. He paused, waiting. McAllister. She watched his eyes close briefly, as if the name caused physical pain. Mrs. McAllister. Each syllable dripped venom. I hope I won't have the displeasure of crossing your path again. He walked away. Didn't look back. Just strode down the path with his shoulders rigid and his hands clenched at his sides, putting distance between himself and the ghost that refused to stay buried. Evelyn stood frozen, arms around Flora, trembling. The child looked up at her with worried eyes. Why was that man angry? Evelyn didn't have an answer. Didn't have anything except the dying light and the crushed daisy Flora had dropped, and the ghost of everything she'd lost, walking away from her through the gathering dark. The walk back to Belgrave Square felt endless. Evelyn held Flora's hand perhaps too tightly, her mind replaying the encounter in fragments. James's face when he'd recognized her, the ice in his voice when he'd said Mrs. McAllister, the way he'd looked at Flora and drawn all the wrong conclusions. Good. Let him think what he would. The townhouse appeared through the gathering dusk, gas lamps already lit along the street. Evelyn climbed the steps, pushed open the door. Her mother had insisted she needn't knock. This was still her home, and stepped into the warmth. Perkins materialized from the butler's pantry. Mrs. McAllister, Lady Margaret is in the drawing room. She asked that you join her when you returned. Of course she had. Thank you, Perkins. Evelyn crouched to Flora's level. Why don't you go find Mrs. Cook? I believe she mentioned something about teaching you to make shortbread. Flora's face brightened despite her earlier fright. Really? Really? Go on. The girl scampered toward the kitchen, red curls bouncing. Evelyn watched her go, then straightened her shoulders and walked to the drawing room. Her mother sat by the fire, teacup in hand, but her posture was too straight, her attention too focused on the doorway. She'd been waiting. "You saw him," Lady Margaret said. Not a question. Evelyn closed the door behind her and crossed to the other chair, sinking into it with less grace than she'd have preferred. "In Kensington Gardens. And he thinks I'm a widow with a child." Evelyn stared into the fire. "I didn't correct him." Her mother was quiet for a long moment. "What did he say? That I'd vanished for 5 years, that he'd searched for me, that he'd thought I was dead." The words tasted bitter, as if I'd done it on purpose, as if I'd chosen to disappear. "What did you tell him?" "That I'd been in Scotland, that I'd married, that my husband died 6 months ago." Evelyn's hands clenched in her lap. "He looked at me like I'd betrayed him, Mama. Like I was the one who'd broken faith. Evelyn, he was engaged. 2 months after I disappeared. I read it in the newspaper." Lady Margaret set down her teacup with careful precision. "I know." Evelyn's head snapped up. "You knew? When you wrote to tell me you were alive, yes, I knew about the engagement." Her mother's voice was gentle but firm. "I didn't tell you, because you were still recovering. You'd lost your memory, nearly died, were living with strangers. What purpose would it have served?" "He moved on," Evelyn said hollowly. "It was an arrangement, Evelyn, orchestrated by both families to help him cope with his grief." Lady Margaret leaned forward. "Everyone said he went through it like a man walking to the gallows, and in the end, he didn't go through with it." Evelyn went very still. "Told what?" 2 years after the engagement was announced, he ended it, refused to marry her, paid the Hawkins family a substantial settlement, and has remained unmarried ever since." Her mother paused. "It caused quite the scandal." Something twisted in Evelyn's chest. "Why?" "He gave no official reason, but there were rumors that he couldn't marry her while still in love with a dead woman." The fire crackled in the silence that followed. Evelyn stood abruptly, paced to the window. Outside, London settled into evening. Lamplighters making their rounds, carriages rattling past, the city breathing its endless rhythm. "It doesn't matter," she said finally. "Doesn't it? I didn't come back to London for him, Mama. I came for Henry's wedding and to secure Flora's future before Catherine Fraser decides to make trouble." Her mother's expression sharpened. "You think she'll challenge the guardianship?" "I know she will. Her solicitor already sent a letter." Evelyn's jaw tightened. "She abandoned Flora when she was 6 months old, and now that Owen's dead and she's heard I have connections to nobility, suddenly she wants to play mother. Then we'll fight this." Lady Margaret's voice turned steely. "Mr. Thornton is the best solicitor in London. We'll build a case she can't possibly win." "What if it's not enough?" The fear Evelyn had been holding back crept into her voice. "What if I lose her?" "You won't." Her mother stood, crossed to take Evelyn's hands. "I didn't survive losing you once to watch you lose that child. We'll fight this, Evelyn, and we'll win." A knock at the door interrupted them. Perkins entered with a silver tray bearing a single envelope. "This just arrived by messenger, my lady." "Marked urgent." Lady Margaret took the envelope, examined the seal. "The Hartfields." She handed it to Evelyn. "Henry's future in-laws." Evelyn broke the seal, scanned the contents, and felt her stomach drop. "Mrs. McAllister, we are delighted to confirm your attendance at the wedding celebration at Hartfield House this Friday evening. We understand you have recently returned to London and look forward to welcoming you back into society. As you may know, His Grace the Duke of Rothwell will be serving as groomsman to your cousin Henry. We trust his presence will not cause undue discomfort, but thought it best to inform you in advance. The gathering will begin at 8 o'clock. Dress is formal. Yours sincerely, Countess of Hartfield." "They know," Evelyn said quietly, "about the garden." "Of course they know. Society knows everything within hours." Lady Margaret took the letter, read it herself. "And they're deliberately putting you both in the same room to see what happens. I could refuse to attend." "No, you couldn't." Her mother's voice was kind, but inflexible. "Henry is your cousin, your only family besides me. Not attending would be noted, discussed, and used against you when the custody hearing comes. You need to appear stable, connected, properly reintegrated into society." Evelyn sank back into her chair. "So I have to go to a ball where the Duke will be, where everyone will be watching us, waiting for me to fall apart or cause a scene." "You have to go and show them exactly what you're made of." Lady Margaret's eyes glinted. "You survived a shipwreck, amnesia, 5 years in exile, and widowhood. You can certainly survive one evening in a ballroom." "He hates me." "He thinks he does. There's a difference." Her mother rang for Perkins. "Dad, we have 3 days to prepare. That should be just enough time. For what? Lady Margaret smiled, the sharp, calculated smile of a woman who'd navigated London society for 40 years. To make sure you look absolutely devastating. Later that evening, after Flora had been tucked into bed, Evelyn sat alone in her childhood bedroom. The room looked much as she'd left it 5 years ago. Same rose-patterned wallpaper, same cream curtains, same escritoire by the window. She crossed to it now, opened the small drawer and found it still there. A folded piece of paper, ink faded but still legible. My dearest James, I find I cannot wait until I return from Scotland to tell you what has been in my heart these many months. I love you. I have loved you since the first time you asked me to dance, since the first time you made me laugh, since the first time I saw the way you look at the world and wished I might be part of it with you. When I return, if you still wish to ask me that important question you mentioned, my answer will be yes. It has always been yes. Yours, Evelyn. She'd written it the night before she left for Scotland, had planned to send it, but the letter had never left this drawer, never been sealed, never been posted, never reached the man it was meant for. Evelyn held the letter over the candle flame on her desk, watched the paper catch and curl and turn to ash. The girl who'd written that letter was dead, had drowned in the North Sea along with her dreams of a simple proposal, a happy marriage, a life that made sense. The woman who remained had harder edges and colder blood, and a child to protect. Friday would come. She would go to the ball. She would face the Duke of Rothwell with her head high and her heart locked away where it couldn't betray her again. Outside her window, London rain began to fall, soft at first, then harder, drumming against the glass like fingers demanding entry. Evelyn closed the curtains and turned away. Some storms you weathered, some you simply survived. The next morning, Lady Margaret woke her early. "The modiste will be here at 10, her mother announced, sweeping into the room with the efficiency of a general marshalling troops. "We need to discuss what you'll wear to the Hartfield gathering." By the time Madame Delacroix arrived with her assistant and 3 large trunks of fabric samples, Evelyn had been measured, consulted, and overruled on no fewer than 6 separate design decisions. "Pewter silk," the modiste declared, holding a shimmering grey fabric up to the light, with black lace at the bodice and sleeves. "Elegant, appropriate for your mourning period, but with enough presence to command a room." "It's too much," Evelyn protested. "It's perfect," Lady Margaret countered. Madame Delacroix nodded approvingly. "You need armour, Mrs. McAllister. Beautiful armour, but armour nonetheless." After the modiste had departed, Evelyn found herself alone in the drawing room with her mother. "I saw him once, you know," Lady Margaret said quietly. "The Duke. About a year after you disappeared." Evelyn looked up sharply. "He came here." Her mother gazed into the fire, asked if we'd heard anything, any news at all. He looked haunted, like a man who'd lost something he couldn't name and couldn't forget. "He got engaged," Evelyn said flatly. "Only because his family applied considerable pressure." Lady Margaret turned to face her, and something flickered across her expression, something that looked like regret. "I wanted to tell you, when you wrote from Scotland saying you were alive, saying you'd seen the engagement announcement, saying you'd decided to stay, I wanted to write back and tell you the truth, that he'd ended it, that he'd been searching for you." She paused, drew a breath. "But you also wrote that you were happy, that you'd found peace in Glenmore, that Owen and Flora needed you, that you'd built a life there. You asked me not to interfere, not to tell anyone in London you'd survived." Her voice softened. "So I respected your wishes. I let you have your peace, even though part of me wondered if I was doing the right thing." Evelyn felt her throat tighten. "You were respecting what I asked for. Was I? Or was I taking the easier path?" Lady Margaret's eyes glistened. "I'll never know if things would have been different if I told you the truth then. You did what I asked. I chose to stay in Scotland. That was my decision, not yours." Lady Margaret squeezed her daughter's hand. "The Duke came to this house looking for you, Evelyn, multiple times in that first year, and even after the engagement was announced, I could see it in his eyes. He hadn't moved on. He was simply surviving. Then why did he look at me in that garden like I'd betrayed him? Because you did what he couldn't. You built a new life. You moved forward. And I suspect that, to a man who spent years frozen in grief, that feels very much like abandonment." Evelyn pulled her hand away, stood, crossed to the window. "I didn't abandon him. I was trying to survive. I know that. And someday, perhaps he will too." Friday arrived too quickly. Evelyn stood before the mirror while her mother's lady's maid fastened the last of the tiny buttons running down her spine. The pewter silk caught the lamplight and shimmered like water under moonlight. Beautiful, cold, impenetrable. Armor. Looking at her reflection now, Evelyn understood why. The gown fit like it had been painted onto her body. The black lace at the bodice and sleeves provided the nod to mourning that propriety demanded, but there was nothing demure about the cut. Her hair had been swept up in an elaborate arrangement that exposed her neck and the small scar at her temple, the one she usually hid, the one that marked where her head had struck rock in the water. She looked like a woman who had survived drowning. She looked dangerous. "You're certain about this?" Lady Margaret stood in the doorway, already dressed in deep purple silk, diamonds at her throat. "We can still send your regrets." Evelyn met her mother's eyes in the mirror. "And let Catherine Fraser's solicitor argue that I'm an unstable guardian who hides from society. No, I'm going. He'll be there. I know. People will watch you both. Wait for a reaction. Then I'll give them nothing to see." Evelyn turned from the mirror, picked up her gloves. Black silk. "I've survived worse than a ballroom full of gossips, Mama." Lady Margaret's expression softened. "You have indeed." She crossed the room, took Evelyn's face between her hands. "You are my daughter. You are an Ashcroft. We do not break. We bend," Evelyn finished. It had been her father's favorite saying. "We bend," her mother agreed. "But we do not break." A soft knock interrupted them. Flora appeared in the doorway in her nightgown, eyes wide. "You look like a princess," the girl breathed. Evelyn's heart clenched. She knelt, heedless of the expensive silk, and pulled Flora into a hug. "I'll be home before you wake up, I promise." "Will the angry man be there?" Flora's voice was very small. "Yes." "Will he be angry again?" Evelyn pulled back, looked into those worried brown eyes. Perhaps, but that's not your concern, darling." After Flora had been shepherded away by the housekeeper, Evelyn descended the stairs to where the carriage waited. "Armor," she reminded herself. "You're wearing armor." Hartfield House was everything Evelyn remembered and more. The entrance hall soared 3 stories high, lit by an enormous crystal chandelier that threw fractured light across marble floors and gilt-framed paintings. "Lady Margaret Ashcroft and Mrs. McAllister," the butler announced as they entered. The music didn't stop, but conversations did. Evelyn felt the weight of every eye in the room turn toward her, felt the ripple of recognition, shock, curiosity spreading through the assembled guests like a wave. She kept her chin up and her expression serene, and walked into that ballroom as if she had every right to be there. Because she did. The Countess of Hartfield materialized almost immediately. "Mrs. McAllister, how wonderful that you could join us. We were all so terribly shocked to learn of your survival. Such a miracle." "Indeed," Evelyn murmured. "Thank you for the invitation, Lady Hartfield." "Oh, we simply couldn't have Henry's wedding celebration without his dear cousin. Now could we?" The Countess's eyes were sharp with curiosity. "Though I confess, we knew so little about what happened to you. 5 years is such a long time to be." "Way, I was recovering in Scotland," Evelyn said pleasantly. "The climate there is quite restorative. And you married a physician, I understand. Dr. Owen McAllister." "Yes. How tragic that he's passed." The Countess didn't sound tragic at all. She sounded fascinated. "And you have a daughter, I'm told." "Stepdaughter," Evelyn corrected. "Flora. She's 4. Charming." The Countess's attention had already shifted. "Oh, there's Lady Pemberton. You must excuse me. Do help yourself to the champagne." She swept away in a rustle of silk. Lady Margaret appeared at Evelyn's elbow with 2 glasses. "That went well. She thinks I'm a curiosity." "You are," her mother said frankly. "The woman who came back from the dead. You'll be the topic of conversation for weeks." Evelyn took the champagne and sipped it. The wine was good, expensive, French. "Evelyn," she turned at the familiar voice. Henry stood there, looking uncomfortable in his formal black coat. "Henry," she smiled, a real smile this time. "Congratulations on the upcoming wedding." "Thank you." He glanced around, lowered his voice. "Listen, I need to warn you. I know the Duke is here," Evelyn said quietly. Henry winced. "Yes, well, he's my groomsman. Couldn't exactly uninvite him when—" He trailed off, looking miserable. "This is awkward." "It's fine, Henry." "Is it?" Her cousin's eyes were worried. "Because he's been standing over there for the last 5 minutes staring at you like a man who's seen a ghost." Evelyn's heart stuttered. She didn't turn around, didn't look. Where? Near the terrace doors, with Lord Ashford and Mr. Carrington. Henry hesitated. "He looks— Evelyn, he looks awful." "I don't think he's slept since—" That's not my concern, Evelyn said, more sharply than she'd intended. She softened her tone. I'm sorry. That was rude. It's been a difficult week. I can imagine. Henry touched her arm gently. If you need to leave early, I'll understand. I'm not leaving. Evelyn straightened her shoulders. I have as much right to be here as anyone. Of course you do. Henry smiled, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. Come meet Caroline. She's been dying to know you. He led her across the ballroom toward a young woman in pale blue silk. Evelyn let herself be introduced, let herself smile and offer congratulations, and pretend her entire awareness wasn't focused on the man standing somewhere behind her. She could feel his gaze like a physical weight. The evening stretched on. Evelyn danced with Henry, with two of his university friends, with an elderly earl. She smiled and nodded and kept her champagne glass full, and absolutely did not, look toward the terrace doors where the Duke of Rothwell stood like a statue carved from ice. It was nearly 10 o'clock when the ballroom became too warm, too crowded, too full of sidelong glances and whispered speculation. Evelyn excused herself and slipped through the French doors onto the terrace. The night air hit her like a slap. Cold, clean, carrying the scent of autumn leaves and distant rain. She walked to the stone balustrade, gripped it with both hands, and let herself breathe. Running away! The voice came from the shadows to her left. Evelyn closed her eyes briefly, then turned. James stood in the doorway, backlit by the golden glow from the ballroom. He'd removed his gloves. His hands hung loose at his sides, but his posture was rigid as iron. I needed air, she said evenly. Of course you did. He stepped onto the terrace properly, and the light fell across his face. Henry was right, he looked terrible. There were shadows under his eyes, harsh lines bracketing his mouth, a tightness to his jaw that spoke of sleepless nights. You're welcome to stay, Evelyn said coolly. I was just leaving. Don't. The single word stopped her. She turned back. Don't what? Don't run from me again. His voice was rough. Don't disappear. Don't, Christ, Evelyn, just don't. I'm not running, I'm going back inside. After you've had your air. After you've put enough distance between us that you can pretend this conversation never happened. He took a step closer. That's what you do, isn't it? Disappear when things get difficult? The accusation landed like a blow. Evelyn felt heat flood her face. Anger, bright and sharp. Excuse me. You vanished for 5 years. I nearly died. And now you can't even stand to be in the same room with me for more than an hour before you have to escape. His eyes glittered in the dim light. Tell me, Mrs. McAllister, do you make a habit of abandoning people who care about you? The words hit like a slap. Evelyn's hand moved before she could stop it. The crack of her palm against his face echoed across the terrace. James touched his cheek slowly, as if surprised to find it stinging. They stared at each other in the terrible silence that followed. How dare you? Evelyn breathed. How dare you accuse me of abandoning anyone when you... Her voice broke. You got engaged 2 months after my funeral. 2 months. It wasn't 2 months. And you were promising to marry Lady Isabel Hawkins. Something cracked in his expression. Evelyn, don't. She held up a hand. Don't tell me it was complicated. Don't you dare try to explain how you moved on so quickly while I was... She had to stop, force air into her lungs, while I was lying in a stranger's bed, trying to piece together who I was. I didn't know you were alive, he said hoarsely. And if you had... The question came out sharp as glass. If I'd sent a letter the moment my memory returned, would you have broken off the engagement? Or were you already too committed to back out? James flinched. That's what I thought. Evelyn's laugh was bitter. So forgive me if I don't feel particularly guilty about abandoning you. You'd already replaced me. I never... He stopped, ran a hand through his hair, destroying its careful arrangement. The engagement was a mistake. I ended it 2 years later. 2 years? Evelyn stared at him. You stayed engaged to her for 2 years. I was trying to... He struggled for words. Everyone kept saying I needed to move on, that you were gone, that I had duties, responsibilities. The engagement gave me something to focus on besides the fact that you were gone and I hadn't been able to save you. Despite herself, Evelyn felt something twist in her chest. You couldn't have saved me. No one could. I know that now. His voice dropped. But then, I kept thinking, if I'd insisted on going with you to Scotland, if I'd convinced you to take the carriage instead of the ship, if I'd told you I loved you before you left instead of waiting for the right moment, that never came. Stop. The word came out choked. They stood in the cold autumn air, years of unsaid things hanging between them like ghosts. Why did you end it? Evelyn asked finally. The engagement. James was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Because I stood in the church for the final preparations and realized I was about to promise my life to someone who wasn't you, and I couldn't. Even if you were dead, even if I never saw you again. I couldn't marry her while I was still— He stopped. Still what? He looked at her then, really looked at her, and his eyes were full of something that made her breath catch. Still in love with a ghost, he said simply. The words hung in the air between them. Evelyn felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. She blinked them back furiously. Well, the ghost is real now, flesh and blood, and very much alive. Does that change anything? I don't know, he said honestly. You're married, we're married. You had a life without me. She looked down. Owen's simple silver band still circled her finger. His name was Owen, she heard herself say. Dr. Owen McAllister. He found me on the beach after the shipwreck. James went very still. The shipwreck. And somehow, standing there in the cold with years of hurt between them, Evelyn found herself telling him about the North Sea swallowing her whole, about waking on a beach with no memory, Owen's face the first thing she saw, about Flora crying for a mother who wasn't there, about the day her memory returned, and the newspaper that tore her heart to pieces. I saw your engagement announcement, she said quietly. Owen found me on the floor. I'd torn the pages to shreds. James closed his eyes as if in pain. He was a good man, Evelyn continued. Kind, gentle. He loved his daughter more than anything in the world. The marriage was practical. He was dying. He wanted to make sure Flora would be protected if Catherine came back. Catherine? Flora's mother. She abandoned them when Flora was 6 months old. Evelyn's jaw tightened. Now Owen's dead and she wants Flora back. Not because she loves her, because she's discovered I have connections to nobility and thinks the child is her ticket to a better life. Understanding dawned in his expression. That's why you're here. The custody battle. The hearing is in 3 weeks. Evelyn's hands clenched on the balustrade. My solicitor says my position is weak. Catherine is her natural mother, no matter what she did. A judge might rule that a child belongs with the woman who bore her. That's insane. That's the law. She looked out at the dark gardens. I promised Owen I'd protect her. I can't— Her voice cracked. I can't lose her. She's all I have left. The silence that followed was different now, softer. She's not your daughter, he said quietly. The child in the garden. No, she's my stepdaughter. Evelyn turned to face him. But I love her as if she were mine. I've raised her for 3 years. I'm the only mother she's ever known. James was quiet for a long moment, studying her face. What do you need? The question surprised her. What? To win the case. What do you need? Evelyn hadn't expected this. Money for a good solicitor, character witnesses, evidence that Catherine is unfit. I can help. She stared at him. Why would you do that? Because that little girl deserves better than to be used as a pawn. He stepped closer. And because you promised a dying man you'd protect his daughter. That kind of loyalty deserves support. Evelyn felt something crack in her chest, some wall she'd built carefully over 5 years. I don't want your charity, she whispered. It's not charity. He paused. Call it restitution. For the things I should have said 5 years ago and didn't. Your Grace, let me help you save her, he said quietly. Let me do this one thing right. Evelyn looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the truth in his eyes. Why? She asked again. His answer was simple. Because you loved her enough to cross half of Britain to keep her safe. That's the kind of love worth protecting. Something in Evelyn's throat tightened. She nodded once, unable to speak. I'll contact my solicitor in the morning, he said. Geoffrey Hartley, the best in London for custody cases. I can't afford— I can. His tone left no room for argument. Consider it settled. They stood in silence for a moment. I should go back inside, Evelyn said finally. Evelyn, she paused. I'm sorry, he said quietly, for what I said in the garden, for assuming the worst. You didn't deserve that. Evelyn looked at him for a long moment. Neither of us deserves what happened, but here we are anyway. Here we are, he agreed. She turned and walked back toward the light and warmth of the ballroom, leaving him standing alone in the darkness. But this time, when she walked away, it didn't feel quite like running. Evelyn didn't sleep that night. She lay in her childhood bed listening to the house settle around her, replaying the conversation on the terrace, the way James had looked at her when she'd mentioned the shipwreck, the roughness in his voice when he'd said still in love with a ghost, The way he'd offered to help without hesitation. She'd come back inside after leaving him on the terrace, had endured another hour of polite conversation and sidelong glances before pleading exhaustion. Lady Margaret had been mercifully silent during the ride home, though Evelyn felt her watching, assessing, waiting for explanation. There would be questions in the morning, but morning came too soon, announced by pale grey light filtering through the curtains and the sound of Flora's small feet padding down the hallway. The door creaked open. "Mammy, are you awake?" Evelyn opened her eyes, found the girl standing in the doorway clutching her cloth rabbit, red hair a wild tangle around her face. "I am now, sweetheart." She lifted the blankets in invitation. "First bad dream." Flora climbed into the bed and burrowed against Evelyn's side with the ease of long practice. "No, just missed you. You were gone when I went to sleep. I told you I'd be home before you woke, but I woke up in the middle, and you weren't here yet." The small voice was reproachful. Evelyn pressed a kiss to the top of Flora's head, breathed in the scent of soap and sleep-warm child. "I'm sorry. The party went later than I expected. Was it fun?" "Not particularly." "Was the angry man there?" Evelyn's chest tightened. "Yes." "Was he angry?" "At first." She chose her words carefully. "But then we talked. Sometimes when grown-ups talk, they can understand each other better." Flora considered this with the seriousness of the very young. Mrs. McTavish said, "Talking only works if people want to understand. Otherwise, it's just noise." Mrs. McTavish was very wise. They lay together in comfortable silence for a few moments before Flora spoke again. "Mammy, are we going to stay here? In London?" The question carried weight beyond its simple words. Evelyn heard what the child was really asking. "Is this home now? Are we safe here? Will you leave me?" "For a while," Evelyn said honestly. "We need to talk to some people about making sure you can stay with me forever." "Do you remember what I told you about your mama? Your first mama, Catherine?" Flora's body went tense. "The lady who went away." "Yes. She wants to see you again." "I don't want to see her." The words came out small and frightened. "I don't remember her. I only remember you and Papa." "I know, darling." Evelyn held her tighter. "And I'm going to make sure you don't have to go anywhere you don't want to go. That's why we're here. To talk to people who can help." "Will the angry man help?" The question surprised her. "Why do you ask that?" "Because you're less sad after talking to him." Flora looked up with those two perceptive brown eyes. "Before, when we walked home from the garden, you were very sad. But last night when you came home, you were different sad. The kind that's mixed with something else." Evelyn stared at her stepdaughter, wondering when exactly the child had learned to read emotions with such precision. Owen's doing, probably. He'd always said doctors needed to see what people weren't saying. "Yes," she said finally. "The Duke said he would help us." "Why?" "Because—" Evelyn paused. "How did you explain the complicated tangle of past love and present guilt and shared history to a 4-year-old? "Because he's a good man who wants to make sure little girls stay with the people who love them." Flora seemed satisfied with this answer. She snuggled closer, already drifting back toward sleep. Evelyn lay awake, staring at the ceiling, and wondered what she'd set in motion by accepting James's help. The morning post arrived at 10 o'clock. Evelyn was in the breakfast room with her mother and Flora when Perkins entered with the silver tray. He set it beside Lady Margaret's teacup with the discretion of long practice. 3 letters. "My lady, 1 for you, 2 for Mrs. McAllister." Evelyn looked up sharply. She wasn't expecting correspondence. No one in London knew she was here except— Lady Margaret picked up the first envelope, examined it. "From the Duke of Rothwell." She raised an eyebrow. That was quick. Evelyn's heart did something complicated in her chest. She set down her toast, took the letter with fingers that wanted to tremble and refused to let them. The seal was his personal crest, pressed into dark blue wax. She broke it, unfolded the single sheet of heavy paper. "Mrs. McAllister, I have spoken with Geoffrey Hartley regarding your situation. He has agreed to take your case and wishes to meet with you at his offices in Lincoln's Inn Fields tomorrow at 2 o'clock to discuss strategy. I have also taken the liberty of contacting several individuals who may serve as character witnesses should the need arise. Please bring any documentation you have regarding your marriage to Dr. McAllister and his wishes concerning Flora's guardianship. Hartley is the best. Trust him. Yours, Rothwell Short, professional." No mention of the conversation on the terrace, of ghostly love or old wounds. Just help, practical and immediate. Evelyn read it twice, then set it aside and reached for the second letter. This one had no seal, just her name written in an unfamiliar hand. She opened it. The words inside made her blood run cold. Mrs. McAllister, I understand you have taken it upon yourself to assume guardianship of my daughter, Flora McAllister. While I appreciate that you provided care during my late husband's illness, I must inform you that I intend to reclaim my parental rights. Flora is my child by birth and by law. No marriage of convenience between yourself and Dr. McAllister can supersede a mother's natural claim. I will see you at the hearing. I suggest you prepare yourself for disappointment. Yours, Catherine Fraser. The signature was bold, confident, utterly without shame. Evelyn's hands shook. She set the letter down carefully before she crushed it. What is it? Lady Margaret leaned forward, concerned. Catherine, Evelyn's voice came out flat. She's written to inform me she intends to take Flora. Her mother's expression hardened. She plucked the letter from the table, read it, and made a sound of disgust. The audacity. My late husband. As if she had any right to claim Owen after what she did. Flora looked between them, sensing tension. What's wrong? Nothing, sweetheart. Evelyn forced her voice calm. Just grown-up business. Why don't you go see if Mrs. Cook needs help with the biscuits? The girl slid from her chair and left, casting worried glances back. Once she was gone, Lady Margaret reread Catherine's letter. She's trying to intimidate you, make you give up before the fight even begins. She has every legal right to try for custody. Evelyn pushed her untouched breakfast away. She's Flora's mother. I'm just the woman who married her abandoned husband. You're the woman who raised that child for 3 years, who sat up with her when she was ill, who taught her to read, who held her when she cried for a father who was dying. Lady Margaret's voice was steel. Catherine Fraser gave birth to Flora. You made yourself her mother. There's a difference. The law may not see it that way. Then we'll make sure the judge does. Her mother stood, decisive. You'll meet with Hartley tomorrow. We'll gather every piece of evidence that shows Catherine abandoned her child and you saved her. A knock at the door interrupted them. Perkins again, looking faintly uncomfortable. Forgive the intrusion, my lady. The Duke of Rothwell is here. He asks if Mrs. McAllister is at home to visitors. Evelyn's heart jumped. He's here, now? In the drawing room, madam. Lady Margaret and Evelyn exchanged glances. I'll entertain Flora, her mother said. Take your time. Evelyn stood, smoothed her skirts with hands that still wanted to shake, and walked to the drawing room with something that felt dangerously like anticipation coiling in her stomach. James stood by the window, hands clasped behind his back, looking out at the square. He'd dressed simply. Dark coat, grey waistcoat, no unnecessary ornament. When he turned at her entrance, she saw the shadows under his eyes were darker than they'd been last night. He hadn't slept either. Your Grace. She closed the door behind her. I didn't expect to see you so soon. I wanted to make sure you received Hartley's information. His gaze searched her face, and to see if you'd had any complications. Wordlessly, Evelyn crossed to the writing desk, picked up Catherine's letter, and handed it to him. She watched his expression darken as he read. Arrogant, he said quietly, and stupid, sending a threatening letter before the hearing. Her solicitor will hate this. Why? Because it shows her character, vindictive, confrontational, not the image you want to present when arguing you're the better parent. He set the letter down. May I keep this? Why? Evidence. Everything she says, everything she does between now and the hearing, it all builds a picture of who she is. His eyes met hers. She's already making mistakes. We just need to make sure the judge sees them. The words settled between them, heavy with implication. Evelyn sank into a chair. You really think we can win this? James pulled another chair closer than propriety strictly allowed, and sat facing her. I think Catherine Fraser abandoned a 6-month-old baby and disappeared for 4 years. I think Owen McAllister married you specifically to protect his daughter from her. I think any judge who looks at the facts will see that Flora belongs with you. And if they don't, then we appeal, and we keep fighting until we find a judge with sense. His voice was firm. I meant what I said last night. Evelyn, I'm going to help you keep her. She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the determination in his eyes, the set of his jaw. This wasn't charity. This wasn't guilt. This was the Duke of Rothwell, deciding something needed to be done, and marshalling every resource at his disposal to do it. It was achingly familiar. Why? The question slipped out before she could stop it. Why are you doing this? Really? He was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was careful, measured. Because 5 years ago I failed to protect you. I let you get on that ship without telling you I loved you. I let you disappear without finding you. I let myself believe you were dead when some part of me always wondered. He stopped, gathered himself. I can't fix the past, but I can help you protect Flora. So that's what I'm going to do. Evelyn's throat tightened. Your Grace, James, he said quietly. Say when we're alone, at least. Let me be James. The intimacy of it, the request for something simple and human beneath the title and the formality, undid something in her carefully maintained composure. James, she whispered. He exhaled, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. Better. He stood, moved toward the door. The appointment with Hartley is tomorrow at 2. I'll send a carriage. I can arrange my own transportation. Evelyn, he turned back. Let me help, please. The word, please, said so simply, so honestly, broke something in her resistance. All right, she said. He nodded once, then paused with his hand on the handle. One more thing. I've hired an investigator to look into Catherine Fraser's current circumstances, her living situation, her associates, her character. That's necessary. His voice was firm. If she's coming after Flora for money, we need to prove it. If she's living with this Pritchard fellow, we need to document it. If she has debts, vices, questionable associations, all of it builds our case. Evelyn stared at him. You've thought of everything. I've thought of winning. He met her eyes. This isn't a game, Evelyn. This is Flora's entire future. I won't leave anything to chance. After he'd gone, Evelyn sat alone in the drawing room and pressed her hands to her face. James Rothwell, the Duke of Rothwell, was fighting for her daughter, the man she'd loved, the man she'd lost, the man who'd just asked her to call him by his given name when they were alone, the man who looked at her like she was still the center of his world, even after 5 years and an ocean of hurt between them. What had she set in motion by accepting his help? And more terrifying still, what would happen when this was over, and there was no battle left to fight, no common enemy to unite them? What would be left then? The offices of Hartley and Associates occupied the second floor of a respectable building in Lincoln's Inn Fields, all dark wood paneling and leather-bound law books that smelled of dust and old ink. Evelyn arrived precisely at 2 o'clock, delivered by the Duke's carriage as promised. The driver had handed her down with the deference reserved for nobility, and Evelyn had felt the weight of James's influence in every gesture. The Duke of Rothwell's resources were not inconsiderable. Geoffrey Hartley was not what she'd expected. He was younger than she'd imagined, perhaps 40, with greying temples and sharp blue eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles. He moved with the brisk efficiency of a man who had no time to waste on pleasantries, but knew exactly how to deploy them when necessary. Mrs. McAllister. He'd greeted her with a firm handshake and a penetrating look. His Grace has apprised me of your situation. Please sit. We have much to discuss. Now he sat across from her at his massive desk. Catherine's letter spread before him alongside the documents Evelyn had brought. Her marriage certificate to Owen, Flora's birth record, Owen's will. Tell me everything, Hartley said, from the beginning. The shipwreck, Scotland, Dr. McAllister, the child, Catherine Fraser. Leave nothing out. Even details that seem insignificant may prove crucial. So Evelyn told him. She told him about the ship breaking apart, about waking on a beach with no memory of who she was, about Owen finding her, caring for her, the slow return of memory. You chose to stay in Scotland, Hartley noted, writing in neat script on a pad of paper, even after your memory returned. Yes. Why? Evelyn hesitated. How much truth did this man need? Because Owen needed help with Flora. Because I'd been declared dead and saw no reason to resurrect myself just to cause scandal. Because... She stopped, chose her words carefully. Because the man I'd loved was engaged to someone else, and I saw no future for myself in London. Hartley's pen scratched across paper. His Grace mentioned you had prior acquaintance. Heat flooded Evelyn's cheeks. We were courting, before the shipwreck. And the engagement you mentioned. That was His Grace's engagement to Lady Isabel Hawkins. Yes, which he ended 2 years later without marrying. Hartley looked up. Did you know that when you chose to stay in Scotland? No, I didn't know until I returned to London. More writing. And Dr. McAllister proposed marriage, for practical reasons. Flora's mother had abandoned them. Owen was ill, dying, though we didn't know how quickly it would happen. He wanted to ensure Flora would be protected if Catherine ever returned. Evelyn's hands tightened in her lap. The marriage was never consummated. We had separate rooms. It was a legal arrangement, nothing more. Can anyone verify this? Heat flooded Evelyn's cheeks again. What? Mrs. Fraser's solicitor will almost certainly argue that your marriage to Dr. McAllister was one of convenience designed solely to give you claim to his daughter and his property. Hartley's voice was matter-of-fact, clinical. If we can establish that the marriage was never romantic in nature, it undermines her argument that you manipulated a dying man. The housekeeper, Mrs. Dalglish, she can testify that Owen and I maintained separate bedrooms, as can several of Owen's patients who visited the house regularly. Evelyn forced herself to meet Hartley's eyes. Owen was a good man. He loved Catherine deeply, even after what she did, and never recovered from her betrayal. Our marriage was an arrangement born of mutual need and respect, nothing more. More scribbling. And when did Catherine Fraser leave? When Flora was 6 months old, she ran off with a merchant from Edinburgh named Edward Pritchard. Left no note, no explanation, just disappeared. His Grace's investigator is currently locating Mr. Pritchard, Hartley said. We hope to obtain a statement from him regarding the circumstances of Mrs. Fraser's departure and her conduct during their association. Evelyn blinked. Already. His Grace is highly motivated. Hartley's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in his eyes. I've known Rothwell for 15 years. I've never seen him take such personal interest in a case. He's being kind. Kindness doesn't explain hiring the best investigator in Britain at considerable expense. Kindness doesn't explain the 3 character witnesses he's already secured from among the peerage. Hartley set down his pen. His Grace is fighting for this child as if she were his own. I thought you should know that. Evelyn's throat closed. She nodded, unable to speak. Hartley continued. What are our chances? She asked quietly. Truthfully, Hartley set down his pen and removed his spectacles, polishing them with a handkerchief while he considered. Truthfully, uncertain. English law heavily favors natural parents, particularly mothers. The presumption is that a child belongs with the woman who bore her, unless we can prove significant unfitness. But she abandoned Flora 4 years ago. She can argue she was young, frightened, overwhelmed by new motherhood, that she's matured since then, and wishes to make amends. He replaced his spectacles. A sympathetic judge might view her return as redemption rather than opportunism. Evelyn's stomach sank. So we'll lose. I didn't say that. Hartley leaned forward. We have several advantages. 1. Dr. McAllister's explicit wishes as stated in his will. 2. Your 3 years of documented care for the child. 3. Flora's own attachment to you, which we can establish through witness testimony. 4. Catherine Fraser's own behavior. He tapped the threatening letter she'd sent. This shows poor judgment and a vindictive nature. If she continues to make such missteps, we can paint a picture of a woman motivated by spite and greed rather than maternal love. What do we need to do? Gather witnesses. Anyone who can speak to your character and your relationship with Flora. Anyone who knew Dr. McAllister and can testify to his wishes. Anyone who witnessed Mrs. Fraser's abandonment or can speak to her current circumstances. Hartley consulted his notes. His Grace has arranged for several witnesses from Scotland to travel to London. Mrs. Dalglish will arrive next week, along with Reverend MacLeod and Dr. Fraser. Dr. Fraser? Owen's colleague? Yes. He's prepared to testify regarding Dr. McAllister's final wishes and his opinion of your care for the child. Hartley paused. His Grace has also secured the attendance of Mrs. Helen Mackenzie. I don't know that name. She was Mrs. Fraser's landlady in Edinburgh. She has information that may prove useful. Something in Hartley's tone made Evelyn's pulse quicken. What kind of information? The investigator's report isn't complete yet, but preliminary findings suggest Mrs. Fraser's circumstances in Edinburgh were less than respectable. If Mrs. Mackenzie can testify to certain behaviors or statements, it will significantly strengthen our case. He stood, gathering papers. I'll need you to write down everything you remember about your time in Scotland, every detail about Owen, about Flora, about Catherine, names of neighbours, patients, anyone who knew the family. Can you do that? Evelyn nodded, though the thought of reliving those 3 years in clinical detail made her chest tight. Good. Hartley extended his hand. The hearing is in 2 weeks. That gives us time to build our case, but not much. I'll be in contact shortly with additional details. As Evelyn moved toward the door, Hartley spoke again. Mrs. McAllister? She paused. His Grace asked me to convey that he's available, should you need to discuss any aspect of the case, day or night. Hartley's expression softened slightly. I've been practicing law for 20 years. I've seen many custody battles, but I've never seen a man fight for a child who isn't his own with such ferocity. Whatever exists between you and the Duke, he's quite serious about helping you win this. Evelyn didn't know what to say to that, so she simply nodded and left. The Duke's carriage waited outside. As Evelyn settled into the plush seats, she found an envelope on the opposite cushion with her name written in James's distinctive hand. She opened it. How did it go with Hartley? I'm at my club until 6 if you need to talk. The investigator has located Edward Pritchard in Edinburgh. He's willing to provide a statement regarding Catherine's character and the circumstances of her departure. Details to follow. You're not alone in this. J. The last line blurred slightly. Evelyn blinked hard and folded the note carefully, tucking it into her reticule. You're not alone in this. She'd been alone for so long, even married to Owen, even surrounded by the community in Glenmore. There'd been a fundamental loneliness to her existence, the loneliness of living a half-truth, of being someone other than who she'd been born to be. Now James was offering, what, partnership? Redemption? Or simply the practical help of a duke with resources trying to right old wrongs? She didn't know. But as the carriage rattled through London streets toward Belgrave Square, Evelyn found herself wanting to go to that club, to find James and tell him what Hartley had said, and see that expression in his eyes, the one that said he was already 3 steps ahead, already planning, already fighting. She didn't, of course. Instead, she went home to Flora. But that evening, after the child had been tucked into bed, Evelyn sat at her writing desk and began to write. Not the clinical testimony Hartley had requested, but a letter. James at Hartley says we have a chance, that with the right witnesses and the right evidence, we might win. I want to believe him. You asked why I chose to stay in Scotland after my memory returned. The truth is more complicated than I told him today. I stayed because I was afraid that coming back would destroy whatever peace I'd found, afraid that seeing you would break me all over again, afraid that the girl who'd loved you so completely had died in that shipwreck and the woman who remained wouldn't know how to love anyone anymore. I was wrong about that last part. I learned to love Flora, to love the quiet life Owen and I built together, to love the person I became in Glenmore, someone useful, someone needed, someone who mattered. But I was right to be afraid of seeing you again, because the moment I did in that garden, I felt everything I'd buried come rushing back. 5 years of grief and anger and longing and love that never died, no matter how hard I tried to kill it. I don't know what happens after this hearing. I don't know if we can find our way back to what we were, or if too much has broken between us to ever be whole again. But I know this. You're fighting for my daughter with everything you have. You're using your title, your money, your influence to protect a child you've never even spoken to. And that means more to me than I have words to express. Thank you for helping, for being here, for being James when I need you to be, and the Duke when the situation demands it, for not giving up on me, even when I gave you every reason to. Yours. She read it over 3 times. Then she folded it carefully, sealed it with wax, and set it on her desk. She would send it tomorrow, or perhaps the day after, or perhaps never. Some truths were easier to write than to share. Outside her window, London settled into night. Somewhere across the city, in a townhouse in Mayfair, the Duke of Rothwell was fighting a battle for a child he'd never met. For her, Evelyn pressed her hand to the letter and closed her eyes and let herself feel, just for a moment, what it meant to not be alone. 3 days before the hearing, Mrs. Dalgleish arrived from Scotland. Evelyn was in the drawing room going over testimony notes when Perkins announced her. The formidable woman swept in like a force of nature, still dressed in travelling clothes, her grey hair slightly dishevelled but her eyes sharp as ever. Mrs. McAllister. She embraced Evelyn with surprising warmth. Or should I be calling you Miss Ashcroft now that you're back among your own people? Evelyn is fine. She pulled back, smiling despite the weight of anxiety that had settled in her chest. How was the journey? Long, expensive, and entirely worth it to see that Fraser woman get what's coming to her. Mrs. Dalgleish settled into a chair with the air of someone preparing for battle. Now then, where do we stand? Before Evelyn could answer, Perkins appeared again. Forgive the interruption, madam. The Duke of Rothwell is here. Evelyn's heart did something complicated. Show him in. James entered a moment later, and Evelyn saw him through Mrs. Dalgleish's eyes, tall, commanding, dressed with the casual elegance that spoke of old money and older titles. He moved with the unconscious authority of a man accustomed to being the most important person in any room. "Mrs. Dalgleish," he crossed to her immediately, offering a slight bow. "Your Grace is most kind to come all this way. I'm James Rothwell, Your Grace." The housekeeper's eyes had gone wide. She attempted a curtsy from her seated position. "I didn't realize, that is, Mrs. McAllister didn't mention that I'd be assisting with the case." James's smile was warm. Mrs. McAllister has a habit of being modest about accepting help. "It's both admirable and frustrating." He turned to Evelyn, and something in his expression softened. "I have the investigator's final report. I thought you should see it before the hearing." He held out a thick envelope. Evelyn took it with trembling fingers. "That was fast. I pay him to be thorough and quick." James glanced at Mrs. Dalgleish. "You may wish to read it privately. Some of the contents are disturbing." "Mrs. Dalgleish knew Owen and Catherine," Evelyn said. "She has a right to hear this." James nodded and settled into a chair. "Then I'll summarize. The investigator located Edward Pritchard in Edinburgh. He was initially reluctant to speak, but when informed this concerned a child custody case, he became more forthcoming." He paused, as if gathering his thoughts. "Catherine Fraser lived with Pritchard for 3 years in rooms above a milliner's shop on Rose Street. They shared a bedroom. His wife discovered the arrangement 18 months ago and confronted them both. Pritchard ended the affair immediately." Mrs. Dalgleish made a sound of disgust. "Since then," James continued, "Mrs. Fraser has been residing in progressively less reputable lodgings. She's accumulated significant gambling debts, approximately £200. She's been seen frequenting gaming houses in Edinburgh's less savoury districts." He looked directly at Evelyn. "And most damningly, she was overheard by her landlady, Mrs. Helen Mackenzie, saying, and I quote, 'If that brat's father left anything worth having, I'll get my share one way or another.'" Evelyn's hands clenched in her lap. "She called Flora a brat. She did. Mrs. Mackenzie is prepared to testify to that exact statement under oath." James's voice was hard. "She's also prepared to testify that Mrs. Fraser never once mentioned missing her daughter during the entire time she lived at Rose Street, never spoke of returning to Scotland, never expressed maternal feeling of any kind. But she'll claim she was ill," Evelyn said, "that she suffered from melancholia after the birth. She will, and Hartley is prepared to demolish that claim." James leaned forward. "The report includes testimony from 3 physicians in Edinburgh. None of them ever treated Catherine Fraser for melancholia or any other ailment. There are no medical records, no documented treatments, no evidence of illness whatsoever." "She's lying," Mrs. Dalgleish said flatly. "She ran off with that man because she wanted to, not because she was ill." "Exactly." James's eyes glinted with something sharp and satisfied. "And we can prove it." Evelyn opened the envelope with shaking hands and scanned the typed pages. Each line was more damning than the last. Detailed accounts of Catherine's movements, her associates, her debts, witness statements from neighbours, shopkeepers, the wife of the man she'd lived with, and at the bottom of the report, a single sentence that made Evelyn's breath catch. "Subject's motivation appears entirely financial. Investigation found no evidence of genuine maternal concern or affection for the child in question." "This is, Evelyn looked up at James. "This is everything we need. It's a start." James stood, began to pace. Evelyn recognized the gesture. He always paced when he was thinking, planning, strategizing. "But we can't be complacent. Hartley says the judge assigned to the case, Sir Edmund Bartlett, is traditional in his views. He believes strongly in the mother-child bond. Even when the mother abandoned her child." Mrs. Dalgleish's voice was incredulous. "Even then. Sir Edmund is also deeply religious, which works in our favour. He has strong opinions about moral character, but he's unpredictable." James stopped pacing, looked at Evelyn. "We need to be prepared for anything. What else can we do?" "Hartley wants Flora to testify." Evelyn went cold. "Absolutely not. She's 4 years old. I won't put her through that." "It may not be our choice." James's voice was gentle but firm. "Sir Edmund has the right to speak with the child privately if he wishes. It's better if we prepare her now, rather than have her surprised in chambers. She'll be terrified." "She'll be honest," James corrected, "and her honesty is our greatest weapon. A 4-year-old doesn't lie about who she loves, who makes her feel safe, who she wants to live with." He crossed to where Evelyn sat, crouched down so their eyes were level. The gesture was so reminiscent of how he used to be, before titles and tragedy, that Evelyn's breath caught. I know you want to protect her from this, he said quietly. But the best way to protect her is to let the judge see the truth, that she loves you, that she doesn't even remember Catherine, that you're her mother in every way that matters. Evelyn closed her eyes. I hate this. I know. His hand found hers, squeezed gently. But we're going to win. I promise you that. You can't promise that. Then let me rephrase. His voice dropped lower, intimate despite Mrs. Dalglish's presence. I will do everything in my power to ensure you keep that child. I will use every resource I have, every connection, every advantage this bloody title gives me. I will fight for her like she's my own, and I will not lose. The intensity in his eyes stole her breath. This wasn't the polite Duke offering charity. This was James, the man who'd once promised her the world, making a vow. Why? She whispered. Because you love her. And I... He stopped, seemed to gather himself. And that's reason enough. Mrs. Dalglish cleared her throat delicately. Well, I can see the child is in good hands. She stood, brushing invisible dust from her skirts. Now then, Your Grace, what do you need from me for this hearing? James released Evelyn's hand and rose smoothly to his full height. The Duke once more. Mr. Hartley will meet with you tomorrow to review your testimony. He'll ask detailed questions about Dr. McAllister's household, Mrs. Fraser's departure, and Mrs. McAllister's care of the child. I'll tell him everything, Mrs. Dalglish said firmly. How that woman left in the dead of night with Dr. McAllister's silver watch and £15 from the household funds. How the doctor sat up with wee Flora for weeks, the babe crying herself hoarse for a mother who'd abandoned her. How Mrs. McAllister, she nodded at Evelyn, came in like an angel and put that house back together with her bare hands. Good. James moved toward the door. Reverend MacLeod arrives tomorrow, and Dr. Fraser the day after. We'll have a full complement of witnesses by the hearing. He paused at the threshold, looked back at Evelyn. Walk me out. It wasn't really a question. Evelyn followed him into the entrance hall, away from Mrs. Dalglish's keen eyes. The space felt suddenly intimate, just the two of them in the marble-floored grandeur. You didn't send the letter, James said quietly. Evelyn's heart stopped. What letter? The one you wrote 3 nights ago. After meeting with Hartley. His eyes were knowing, so I've been waiting for it. How did you... Because I know you. Simple. Direct. You always write things down when you're trying to make sense of them. And after everything that's happened, I hoped. He trailed off, something vulnerable crossing his face. I didn't know what to say, Evelyn admitted. Then say nothing. Or say everything. I don't care which, as long as you... He stopped, ran a hand through his hair in a gesture of frustration. As long as you stop treating me like a stranger doing you a favor. You're the Duke of Rothwell doing me a considerable favor. I'm James, he said, voice rough. I'm the man who loved you 5 years ago and never stopped. I'm the man who's fighting for your daughter because I can't fight for you. Not yet. Not while you're still wearing another man's ring and building walls I can't breach. He stepped closer. But don't mistake practicality for indifference. Evelyn, don't think for one moment that I'm doing this to be kind. Then why? She whispered. Because keeping Flora safe keeps you whole. His hand rose as if to touch her face, then fell. And I need you whole. Even if you can never be mine again. The words hung between them, raw and honest. Before Evelyn could respond, voices drifted from the drawing room, Mrs. Dalglish speaking to Lady Margaret, who must have just entered. The spell broke. James stepped back, assumed the mantle of the Duke once more, shoulders straight, expression neutral. I'll call on you tomorrow after Reverend MacLeod arrives. We should coordinate our witnesses' testimonies. Your Grace, James, he corrected softly. When we're alone, I'm James. He left before she could answer. Evelyn stood in the entrance hall, one hand pressed to her chest where her heart hammered against her ribs, and tried to make sense of what had just happened. I'm the man who loved you 5 years ago and never stopped. I need you whole. She looked down at her left hand, at Owen's silver ring still circling her finger. She'd worn it out of respect, out of loyalty to a good man who'd given her shelter when she had nothing. But Owen was dead, and James was here, fighting battles he didn't have to fight, making promises he didn't have to make. What was she supposed to do with that? That evening, after Flora had been put to bed and Mrs. Dalglish had retired to her guest room, Evelyn found her mother in the study. You're in love with him, Lady Margaret said without preamble. Evelyn sank into a chair. That's a rather bold assumption. It's an observation based on 30 years of knowing you. Her mother set down her correspondence. "The Duke came here today and looked at you like you hung the moon, and you looked at him like you were drowning, and he was air." "Mama, I'm not judging, darling. I'm simply stating facts." Lady Margaret leaned forward. "You loved him before you disappeared. You love him now. The only question is what you're going to do about it." "Nothing," Evelyn said. "At least not until after the hearing. Flora has to come first. The Duke seems to understand that." "He does." Evelyn twisted Owen's ring absently. "He's been extraordinary. The solicitor, the investigator, the witnesses, he's orchestrating everything." "He's courting you," her mother said, "in the only way available to him right now. He can't offer flowers and poetry while you're fighting for your daughter's life, so he's offering resources and protection and his considerable influence. It's quite romantic, actually. It's practical. It's both." Lady Margaret smiled. "And when this is over, when you've won and Flora is safely yours, what then?" Evelyn looked down at her hands. "I don't know. Don't you?" The truth sat in Evelyn's chest like a stone, heavy, undeniable. She loved James Rothwell, had loved him 5 years ago, loved him now, loved him perhaps more than she had before, because now she knew what it meant to lose everything and survive, knew the weight of grief and the cost of love. But loving him and being with him were two different things. 5 years stood between them. 5 years of hurt and misunderstanding and separate lives. She'd been married to another man, had built a life in Scotland, had become someone James didn't know. Could you bridge that kind of distance? Could love be enough? "I need to focus on Flora," Evelyn said finally. "Everything else can wait." "Can it?" Her mother's gaze was knowing. "Because in 2 weeks, this hearing will be over, and then you'll have to decide whether you're going to keep building walls or start tearing them down." Evelyn didn't answer, because she didn't know. The next day, Reverend MacLeod arrived, a kind-faced man in his 60s with a thick Scottish burr and gentle eyes. He embraced Evelyn like a daughter. "Oh, lass, look at you, all dressed in London finery. But you're still the same woman who helped me nurse old Mrs. Campbell through her final days." I am," Evelyn said, throat tight. "Good, because that's the woman I'll be telling the judge about." He patted her hand. "The woman who sat with the dying and comforted the grieving. The woman who loved wee Flora like her own and never once asked for recognition or reward." James arrived an hour later, and Evelyn watched him coordinate the witnesses with the precision of a military general. He spoke with each of them individually, ensured their testimonies wouldn't contradict, identified the strongest points and the potential weaknesses. He was magnificent. "Mrs. Dalgleish," he was saying now, "Hartley will ask you about the night Mrs. Fraser left. Be specific about what was taken, the watch, the money, the lack of any note or explanation. We need to establish that this was theft and abandonment, not illness." "Your Grace." "Reverend MacLeod, focus on Dr. McAllister's character and his final wishes. Hartley will want to know what the doctor said about Mrs. McAllister's care for Flora, his concerns about Catherine returning, his reasons for the marriage." "I understand, Your Grace." "And both of you, if you're asked about Mrs. McAllister's character, be honest but not effusive. The judge will be suspicious of witnesses who seem too rehearsed or too flattering. Speak from the heart. Tell the truth. That's our greatest weapon." He looked up, caught Evelyn watching him, and something shifted in his expression, softened. "A moment," he asked. They stepped into the hallway, away from the witnesses. "You're very good at this," Evelyn said quietly. "At what?" "Taking command, organizing chaos, making people feel confident even when the odds are uncertain." James smiled slightly. "I'm a duke. Taking command is what I do." Then, more seriously, "But I'm doing this for you, not as a duke, as a man who—" He stopped, "as someone who cares very much about the outcome. James, the investigator found one more thing." He pulled a folded paper from his coat. "A statement from the wife of Edward Pritchard. She's willing to testify that Catherine showed no remorse when confronted about the affair, that she laughed when Mrs. Pritchard mentioned Flora, said the child was Owen's problem now." Evelyn's hands shook as she took the paper. "She said that about her own daughter. According to Mrs. Pritchard, yes, it won't be admissible unless Catherine tries to claim she left out of love for the child. But if she does, we have ammunition to destroy that lie." Evelyn looked up at him. "How did you find all this? How did you convince these people to speak?" "Money helps," James admitted. "But mostly, I told them the truth, that a good man died trying to protect his daughter from her own mother, that his widow has loved that child with everything she has, that a woman who abandoned a baby for a married man now wants to use that baby for money." His jaw tightened. People respond to truth, Evelyn, especially when it's this clear. I don't know how to thank you. Win, he said simply. Keep Flora. Be happy. That's thanks enough. He turned to go back to the witnesses, but Evelyn caught his sleeve. Wait. He turned back, one eyebrow raised. Evelyn looked at him, really looked at him. At the man who'd dropped everything to fight her battle. Who'd spent a fortune hiring investigators and solicitors and bringing witnesses from Scotland. Who looked at her like she mattered more than anything else in the world. Why did you never marry? She asked quietly. After you ended the engagement with Lady Isabel, my mother said you've remained unmarried. Why? James was quiet for a long moment. Because I couldn't or wouldn't. Both. He stepped closer. I tried, Evelyn. God knows I tried. After I ended things with Isabel, my mother paraded every eligible woman in England through my drawing room. Beautiful women, accomplished women, women who would have made perfectly acceptable duchesses. And none of them were you. Simple. Devastating. None of them made me feel anything but duty. None of them made me want to wake up in the morning. None of them... He stopped, swallowed hard. None of them made me feel alive. Evelyn's eyes stung. James, you asked why I'm doing this, he said, voice rough. Why I'm fighting for Flora with everything I have. You want the truth. She nodded, unable to speak, because she's yours, and anything that's yours matters to me. Your happiness, your peace, your daughter. All of it matters more than my own comfort or pride or the walls you've built between us. He reached up, tucked a strand of hair behind her ear with infinite gentleness. I love you, Evelyn. I loved you 5 years ago. I love you now, and I will go on loving you whether you can ever love me back or not. The confession hung between them, fragile and fierce. I never stopped, Evelyn whispered, even when I thought I should, even when I married Owen and tried to build a different life, even when I hated you for moving on. I never stopped loving you. James closed his eyes as if in pain. Guys, don't say that unless you mean it. I mean it. She took his hand, pressed it to her cheek. I love you. I'm furious with you. I'm grateful to you. I don't know how to reconcile what we were with what we are now. But I love you. That's never changed. When he kissed her, it was soft and desperate and full of 5 years of longing. Evelyn kissed him back with everything she had, all the love she'd tried to deny, all the grief she'd carried, all the hope she'd been afraid to feel. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, James pressed his forehead to hers. After the hearing, he whispered, when Flora is safe and you're free, we'll figure out the rest. Promise. I promise. A throat cleared delicately behind them. They sprang apart to find Mrs. Dalgleish standing in the doorway, looking thoroughly unsurprised. Reverend MacLeod is asking for you, Your Grace, she said, eyes twinkling. Something about his testimony. Of course. James straightened his coat, assumed the mantle of the Duke once more, but as he passed Evelyn, his hand brushed hers. A promise, a reminder, a vow. Evelyn stood in the hallway and touched her lips and tried to remember how to breathe. 2 more days until the hearing. 2 more days until everything changed. The courtroom was smaller than Evelyn had imagined. She'd pictured something grand, soaring ceilings, ornate wood paneling, the weight of centuries of British justice pressing down from above. Instead, she found herself in a modest chamber that smelled of old paper and lemon polish, with narrow windows that let in thin grey light and wooden benches worn smooth by decades of anxious waiting. Sir Edmund Bartlett sat behind an elevated desk, a man in his 60s with steel grey hair, and the expression of someone who'd heard every lie humanity could devise and believed none of them. He looked down at the assembled parties with the detached interest of a scientist examining specimens. Evelyn sat beside Hartley at a table on the left. Behind them, Lady Margaret, Mrs. Dalgleish, Reverend MacLeod and Dr. Fraser occupied the first row of benches. And in the back, sitting alone but impossible to ignore, was James. She'd felt his presence the moment she'd entered, had resisted the urge to turn and meet his eyes. She needed to focus, needed to be steady, but knowing he was there, that the Duke of Rothwell had come to bear witness, to lend his considerable weight to her cause, steadied something in her chest. On the right side of the room sat Catherine Fraser. Evelyn had seen her only once before, a glimpse in Glenmore years ago when Owen had shown her a daguerreotype he couldn't bring himself to destroy. The woman in the courtroom bore little resemblance to that younger, prettier version. Catherine's face had hardened, lines of bitterness bracketing her mouth. She wore a dress that was too fine for her circumstances, borrowed or purchased on credit, Evelyn suspected. Her hair was elaborately styled, her posture perfect. She looked like a woman playing a role, the repentant mother, the victim of circumstance. Evelyn hated her on sight. "All rise," the clerk announced. They stood as Sir Edmund settled himself, arranged papers, and finally looked up. "This is a petition for custody of the minor Flora McAllister," he began without preamble. "Mrs. Catherine Fraser seeks to overturn the current guardianship arrangement and assume parental rights. Mrs. Evelyn McAllister contests this petition." His gaze moved between them. "I've reviewed the written submissions. We'll hear testimony today, starting with Mrs. Fraser, counsellor." Catherine's solicitor, a thin man named Pembroke with a reedy voice, stood and called Catherine to the witness box. She moved with practiced grace, settled herself with a handkerchief already in hand, and looked up at the judge with eyes that glistened with unshed tears. "Performance," Evelyn thought coldly. "This is all performance." "Mrs. Fraser," Pembroke began gently, "please tell the court about your daughter." "Flora is my whole world," Catherine said, voice trembling. "I've thought of her every day since I was forced to leave." "Forced?" Sir Edmund's eyebrow rose. "Explain." "I was very young when Flora was born, only 24, and I was unwell. The birth was difficult, and afterward I suffered from terrible melancholia. I could hardly recognize myself in the mirror, let alone care for an infant." Catherine dabbed at her eyes. "Dr. McAllister, my husband, he tried to help, but he was so busy with his practice. I felt utterly alone." Evelyn's fingernails bit into her palms. Lies, all lies. "I made a terrible mistake," Catherine continued. "I left, thinking Flora would be better off without a mother who couldn't function. I thought Owen would find someone more capable, someone who could give her what I couldn't in my state." "And where did you go?" Sir Edmund asked. "Edinburgh. I sought treatment for my condition. It took years to recover fully." She looked directly at the judge. "When I finally felt strong enough to be the mother Flora deserved, I learned that Owen had remarried and passed away. I came back immediately, desperate to see my daughter." "And Mrs. McAllister refused you access?" Pembroke prompted. "She did. She's kept Flora from me entirely. Won't even let me see her, speak to her." Catherine's voice broke convincingly. "I understand she cared for Flora while I was ill, and I'm grateful, but Flora is my daughter. I carried her, birthed her, and I've spent 4 years desperate to hold her again." Evelyn watched Sir Edmund's expression, saw something shift, sympathy perhaps, or at least consideration. This was going badly. Hartley rose for cross-examination, his movements unhurried. "Mrs. Fraser, you mentioned seeking treatment in Edinburgh. What was the name of your physician?" Catherine blinked. "I saw several doctors over the years." "Name one." A pause. "Dr. Henderson." "First name?" "I don't recall." "Address of his practice?" "It's been so long." "Mrs. Fraser, if you spent 4 years under medical treatment for severe melancholia, surely you remember the name and address of at least one physician." Hartley's voice was mild, but his eyes were sharp. Catherine's composure cracked slightly. "I was ill. My memory of that time is fragmented." "I see." Hartley consulted his notes. "You mentioned being in Edinburgh seeking treatment. Is it true that during this time you were residing at 14 Rose Street with a Mr. Edward Pritchard?" Colour flooded Catherine's cheeks. Mr. Pritchard was a friend who offered me lodging when I had nowhere else to go." "A friend? Despite the fact that Mr. Pritchard is married, and you shared his rooms for 3 years?" "Objection," Pembroke sputtered. "Mrs. Fraser's living arrangements are not relevant to her fitness as a mother." "I disagree," Sir Edmund said coolly. "Continue, Mr. Hartley." "Mrs. Fraser, were you aware that Mr. Pritchard is married?" Catherine's hands twisted the handkerchief. "Yes, but it wasn't. We weren't." "Mrs. Helen Mackenzie, your former landlady, is prepared to testify that you and Mr. Pritchard shared a bedroom, that you were seen in public together as a couple, and that his wife discovered the arrangement and confronted you both." Hartley's voice remained even. "Is that accurate?" Catherine looked to her solicitor desperately. "Furthermore," Hartley continued, "Mrs. Mackenzie will testify that she heard you say, and I quote, 'If that brat's father left anything worth having, I'll get my share one way or another.' Were you referring to your daughter Flora as a brat?" "No, I never. That's a lie. Mrs. Mackenzie is under oath, Mrs. Fraser, as are you." Hartley let that sink in. "Now, regarding your departure from Glenmore. You stated you left because of melancholia. Is it true that you left in the middle of the night without informing your husband, without leaving a note, and without making any arrangements for your 6-month-old daughter's care?" Catherine's face had gone pale. "I was not in my right mind. Did you take anything with you when you left? Some clothes, personal items, including Dr. McAllister's silver pocket watch, which he'd inherited from his father, and approximately £15 from the household funds? I needed money to survive, so you stole from your husband and abandoned your infant daughter in the middle of the night, not because of illness, but because Mr. Pritchard offered you a more exciting life in Edinburgh." Hartley's voice hardened. "Is that the truth, Mrs. Fraser?" "No, you're twisting everything. I'm simply establishing facts. You left your daughter when she was 6 months old. You didn't write, didn't visit, didn't send money or inquire about her well-being for 4 years. You only returned after learning that Dr. McAllister had died and his widow had connections to the nobility." Hartley paused. "That's not maternal love, Mrs. Fraser. That's opportunism. I love my daughter." "Then why?" Hartley asked quietly. "Don't you know her middle name?" Catherine froze. Sir Edmund leaned forward, interested now. "Mrs. Fraser, what is your daughter's full name?" Catherine's mouth opened, closed. Flora Catherine McAllister. She was named after me." "She wasn't," Hartley said flatly. "Her name is Flora Grace McAllister, named for Dr. McAllister's mother, a fact you would know if you'd been present for her christening. But you weren't, were you? Because you'd already left by then." The silence in the courtroom was absolute. Catherine burst into tears. Real ones this time, Evelyn thought, but not from remorse, from rage at being exposed. "No further questions," Hartley said, and returned to his seat. Evelyn released a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Beside her, Hartley's expression remained neutral, but she saw the glint of satisfaction in his eyes. Behind them, she heard James shift in his seat, felt his presence like an anchor. "We're winning," she thought. "We might actually win this." The afternoon session began with Mrs. Mackenzie's testimony. The Edinburgh landlady was a stout woman in her 50s with a no-nonsense air and a thick Scottish accent. She took the stand with the confidence of someone who had nothing to hide. "Mrs. Mackenzie," Hartley began, "how long did Mrs. Fraser reside at your property on Rose Street?" "Near on 3 years, sir. From the spring of 1845 to the winter of 1847. "And during that time, what was her relationship with Mr. Edward Pritchard?" "They shared rooms, sir, and a bed, if you'll pardon me being blunt." Mrs. Mackenzie's mouth thinned. "His wife came round in a terrible state when she found out. There was shouting, crying, Mrs. Pritchard calling the Fraser woman all manner of names." "And how did Mrs. Fraser respond?" "Laughed, sir. Laughed right in the poor woman's face and said Mr. Pritchard had made his choice." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. "Did Mrs. Fraser ever mention having a daughter?" Hartley asked. "Never. Not once in 3 years." Mrs. Mackenzie's voice was firm. "I didn't even know she had a child until I read about this case in the newspaper. You mentioned in your statement that you overheard Mrs. Fraser make a particular comment about her daughter. Can you repeat that for the court?" "Aye. It was after Mr. Pritchard ended things. She was in my kitchen, half drunk, complaining about her circumstances. She said, and these were her exact words, 'If that brat's father left anything worth having, I'll get my share one way or another.' Did you understand that brat to refer to her daughter?" "I did, sir. She'd just received a letter from Scotland informing her of Dr. McAllister's death. She was counting on there being money in it." Catherine's solicitor attempted to discredit Mrs. Mackenzie on cross-examination, but the landlady held firm. She had no reason to lie, no connection to either party, and her testimony was devastatingly clear. When she stepped down, Evelyn saw Sir Edmund making notes. His expression was inscrutable, but something had shifted in the atmosphere of the courtroom. Next came Mrs. Dalgleish. The housekeeper's testimony was precise and damning. She described the night Catherine left, the missing watch and money, the baby crying for hours, Owen's devastation. Dr. McAllister never recovered from it, Mrs. Dalgleish said firmly. He loved that woman despite everything she'd done. And when Mrs. McAllister, Mrs. Evelyn McAllister, came to us, she put that household back together with her own 2 hands. Describe Mrs. McAllister's relationship with Flora, Hartley prompted. Like mother and daughter, sir, from the very first. The bairn took to her immediately. And Mrs. McAllister, she sat up nights when Flora was teething, sang her to sleep, taught her letters and numbers. She loved that child like she'd borne her herself. And Dr. McAllister's final wishes. He made Mrs. McAllister promise, made her swear on the Bible, that she'd protect Flora if Catherine ever came back. He knew what that woman was, sir. He married Mrs. McAllister specifically to make sure Flora would have a mother who truly loved her. Pembroke's cross-examination was brief and ineffective. Mrs. Dalgleish was unshakable. Reverend MacLeod followed, testifying to Owen's character and his explicit wishes that Evelyn raise Flora. Dr. Fraser spoke to Owen's mental state in his final weeks, clear, rational, determined that his daughter be protected. Each witness built on the last, constructing an edifice of evidence that Catherine couldn't topple, and through it all, Evelyn felt James's presence at her back, steady, unwavering. When the witnesses had finished, Sir Edmund looked up. "I understand Mrs. Evelyn McAllister wishes to testify." Hartley stood. "She does, Your Honour." "Very well. Mrs. McAllister, please take the stand." Evelyn rose on trembling legs, walked to the witness box with her heart hammering so hard she was certain the entire courtroom could hear it. The clerk administered the oath. She placed her hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth. Then she looked out at the assembled crowd and began. Hartley guided her through it gently. The shipwreck, the amnesia, Owen finding her on the beach, Flora crying for a mother who wasn't there. "When did your memory return?" Hartley asked. 8 months after the shipwreck. I remembered everything, my name, my family, my life in London. Her voice steadied, and I chose to stay in Glenmore. Why? This was the moment of truth, the moment she had to make the judge understand. Because Owen needed help, because Flora needed stability, and because— She paused, chose her words carefully. Because I'd seen in the newspaper that the man I'd loved was engaged to be married. I'd been declared dead. My father had passed. There was nothing left for me in London, but there was something for you in Scotland. There was Flora. Evelyn's voice cracked. A baby girl who cried herself to sleep every night because her mother had abandoned her, who reached for me with such trust, such desperate need I couldn't leave her. Tell the court about your marriage to Dr. McAllister. It was a legal arrangement. Owen was dying, we all knew it. Catherine had abandoned them, but legally she was still Flora's mother. Owen feared she might return someday and try to take Flora, not out of love, but for spite or money. Evelyn met Sir Edmund's eyes. He asked me to marry him so I could legally adopt Flora as my stepdaughter. That way, if Catherine came back, I'd have some claim to protect her. Was the marriage romantic in nature? Heat flooded Evelyn's cheeks, but she kept her voice level. No. We had separate bedrooms. Owen loved Catherine until the day he died, and despite what she'd done, our marriage was one of friendship and mutual respect, nothing more. Tell the court about your relationship with Flora. This was easier. The words came freely now. She's my daughter in every way that matters. I've been with her every day for 3 years. I taught her to walk, to talk, to read. I sit with her when she's frightened by storms. I know that she's afraid of the dark, but brave about scraped knees. I know she loves stories about knights and dragons, that she hates porridge but adores strawberries, that she still sleeps with the cloth rabbit Owen gave her when she was a baby. Evelyn's voice broke. I know her, I love her, and the thought of losing her is— She couldn't finish. The words lodged in her throat. "Thank you, Mrs. McAllister," Hartley said gently. Pembroke's cross-examination was brief and ineffective. He tried to establish that Evelyn was merely a temporary guardian, that blood ties were sacred, that Flora deserved to know her real mother. Evelyn answered each question with calm precision, never raising her voice, never losing composure. When she finally stepped down, she caught James's gaze. He nodded once, approval, pride, something that looked like love. Sir Edmund consulted his notes. I have one final matter to address. I wish to speak with the child, Flora McAllister, privately in my chambers. Evelyn's heart stopped. Your Honour, this is standard procedure in custody cases involving young children, Mrs. McAllister. Sir Edmund's voice was not unkind. I simply wish to understand her feelings and preferences. She will not be questioned harshly. Hartley leaned close to Evelyn. Let him see her. Let him hear the truth from her own lips. She'll be frightened. She'll be honest. And that's what we need. Evelyn looked back at James. He nodded once. Trusting. Very well, she whispered. Flora was brought in by Lady Margaret. The child looked tiny in the vast courtroom, her red hair bright against her grey dress. She clutched her cloth rabbit and looked around with wide, worried eyes. Hello, Flora, Sir Edmund said, his voice considerably gentler than it had been all day. Would you come with me? I'd like to talk to you for a few minutes. Flora looked at Evelyn. "Mammy? It's all right, sweetheart. The judge just wants to ask you some questions. Tell him the truth, just like we practiced." Flora nodded and took Sir Edmund's offered hand. They disappeared through the door to his chambers. The 20 minutes that followed were the longest of Evelyn's life. She sat frozen, hands clenched in her lap, barely breathing. Behind her, she heard James shift, felt his presence like an anchor in a storm. Please, she prayed to whatever God might be listening. Please let her be all right. Please let him see the truth. When the door finally opened, Flora emerged first. She ran straight to Evelyn, threw her arms around her neck. "I told him, Mammy," she whispered. "I told him the truth." Evelyn held her tight, breathing in the scent of soap and child, and tried not to cry. Sir Edmund returned to his bench, his expression unreadable. "I've made my decision," he said without preamble. Evelyn's heart stopped. The entire courtroom seemed to hold its breath. "This has been a difficult case," Sir Edmund began. "The law traditionally favours natural parents, and Mrs. Fraser's claim is not without merit. A mother who suffers from illness deserves compassion and an opportunity to reconnect with her child." Catherine sat up straighter, hope lighting her face. "However," Sir Edmund continued, and his voice hardened, "this court also has a duty to act in the best interests of the child, not the parent, and the evidence presented today makes clear that Mrs. Fraser's interest in Flora is not maternal, but financial." Catherine's solicitor shot to his feet. "Your Honour—" "Sit down, Mr. Pembroke." Sir Edmund's tone brooked no argument. Mrs. Fraser abandoned her infant daughter under circumstances that had nothing to do with illness and everything to do with selfish desire. She stole from her husband, disappeared without a word, and made no attempt to contact Flora for 4 years. She returned only after learning of potential financial gain through Mrs. McAllister's connections to the nobility. He looked directly at Catherine. "You don't know your daughter's middle name, Mrs. Fraser. When I asked Flora what frightens her, you couldn't tell me. You don't know her favorite color, her favorite food, or what she dreams about at night. You know nothing about the child you claim to love, because you've never bothered to know her." Catherine had gone white. "Mrs. McAllister, on the other hand, has provided detailed, loving testimony about every aspect of Flora's care. She has documentation of Dr. McAllister's explicit wishes. She has witnesses who testify to her character and her devotion to the child. And most importantly, she has Flora's complete trust and love." Sir Edmund paused, consulted his notes. "Flora told me, in her own words, that she wants to stay with her mammy, that Mrs. McAllister reads to her every night, makes her feel safe and loves her more than the whole sky. A 4-year-old doesn't lie about such things, and this court will not force a child to live with a stranger simply because that stranger gave birth to her." Evelyn's eyes burned. Beside her, Hartley's hand briefly touched her shoulder. "Therefore," Sir Edmund said formally, "I rule in favour of Mrs. Evelyn McAllister. Full custody of Flora Grace McAllister is granted to her stepmother, with complete parental rights. Mrs. Fraser's petition is denied." The gavel came down. The sound echoed through the courtroom like a thunderclap. Catherine let out a wail. Fury and disbelief mingled. "This is outrageous. She's my daughter. You can't—" "I can and I have," Sir Edmund said coldly. "And if you continue to disrupt these proceedings, I'll hold you in contempt. Mr. Pembroke, control your client." Evelyn couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The words echoed in her mind. "Full custody. Complete parental rights. She's yours." Flora tugged her sleeve. "Mammy, does that mean I get to stay with you?" Evelyn looked down at the child, her child now, legally and completely, and felt something break open in her chest. "Yes, darling," she whispered. "You get to stay with me forever." Flora's face split into a grin so bright it rivaled the sun. Behind them, Lady Margaret was crying openly. Mrs. Dalglish clutched Reverend MacLeod's arm, both of them beaming. Dr. Fraser nodded approval, and in the back of the courtroom, James Rothwell, the Duke of Rothwell, stood and smiled. Not the polite, measured smile of a duke performing for society, but something real and warm and relieved and proud. Evelyn met his eyes across the room and mouthed 2 words. "Thank you." He shook his head slightly. "You did this." But they both knew the truth. She couldn't have done it without him. Outside the courthouse, Catherine tried one final confrontation. She pushed through the crowd, face blotchy with tears and rage, and grabbed Evelyn's arm. "You've stolen my daughter." "I saved her from you," Evelyn said quietly, but with steel beneath the words. "Owen knew what you were. That's why he married me." That's why he made sure you'd never get your hands on her. I'll appeal. You can try, but you'll lose again, because the truth is on record now. Everyone knows you're not a grieving mother. You're a woman who saw a child as money and got caught. Evelyn pulled her arm free. Stay away from Flora. Stay away from me. Or I'll make sure every drawing room in Britain knows exactly what kind of woman you are. Catherine's face twisted. For a moment, Evelyn thought she might attack, but then James appeared at Evelyn's shoulder. He said nothing, simply stood there, tall, imposing, every inch the Duke of Rothwell. The weight of his title, his power, his absolute authority radiated from him like heat from a fire. Catherine took one look at him and stepped back. I believe Mrs. McAllister has made herself clear, James said, voice dangerously soft. If you continue to harass her or the child, you'll answer to me, and I assure you, Mrs. Fraser, you don't want that. Catherine looked between them, at Evelyn in her mourning grey, at the Duke in his immaculate coat, at the unmistakable message in his stance. She is under my protection. Touch her and face the consequences. Then Catherine turned and fled, disappearing into the London crowds. Good riddance, Lady Margaret said fiercely, arriving with Flora in tow. Evelyn knelt, pulled Flora into a crushing embrace. We won, sweetheart. You're mine. Really, truly mine. I know, Flora said simply, as if there had never been any doubt. Can we go home now? I'm hungry. Despite everything, the tension, the fear, the months of uncertainty. Evelyn laughed. Yes, darling, we can go home. She stood and found James watching her with an expression that made her breath catch. Walk with me, he asked quietly. It wasn't really a question. Evelyn nodded to her mother, who smiled knowingly and took Flora's hand. We'll see you at home, darling. Then it was just Evelyn and James, standing on the courthouse steps as London flowed around them. You were magnificent in there, he said. I was terrified. You were both. He smiled slightly. But you held steady. You told the truth. You won. We won, Evelyn corrected. I couldn't have done this without you. The solicitor, the investigator, the witnesses. All of it was you. All of it was us, James said quietly. You and me, fighting together. The words settled between them, heavy with implication. What happens now? Evelyn whispered. James looked at her for a long moment. Then he offered his arm. Now, we celebrate. Tomorrow, you rest. And the day after that. He paused. The day after that, we figure out what comes next. Evelyn took his arm, felt the solid warmth of him beneath the fine fabric. And what do you want to come next? She asked. He stopped walking, turned to face her fully, right there on the courthouse steps in full view of London society. I want you, he said simply. I want Flora. I want to wake up every morning knowing you're both safe and happy and mine. I want to give that child the family she deserves. I want to spend the rest of my life proving to you that I'm worth a second chance. Evelyn's eyes stung. James, I'm not asking for an answer now, he continued. You need time. Flora needs time to adjust. I understand that, but I need you to know I'm not going anywhere. I fought for you once. I'll keep fighting for as long as it takes. You don't have to fight anymore, Evelyn said softly. I'm here. I'm not running. I'm not disappearing. I'm just... Scared? Of what? Of this? She gestured between them. Of us? Of wanting something so badly and losing it again? James cupped her face gently. You won't lose me. Not this time. Not ever again. Promise. I promise. He kissed her then, soft and sure and full of promise, right there on the courthouse steps, in front of God and London society and anyone who cared to watch. And Evelyn kissed him back, because she was done running, done hiding, done pretending she didn't love this man with everything she had. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, James pressed his forehead to hers. Come to dinner tomorrow, he said. You, Flora, and Lady Margaret. Let me start showing you what our future could look like. All right, Evelyn whispered. All right, all right. His smile was like sunrise. The celebration at Belgrave Square was modest, but heartfelt. Mrs. Cook had prepared Flora's favourite, shepherd's pie and seed cake, and the child sat at the dining table, swinging her legs and chattering about everything except the hearing, as if her entire future hadn't hung in the balance just hours before. Children were resilient that way, Evelyn thought. Or perhaps Flora had simply always trusted that Evelyn would keep her safe. Lady Margaret raised her glass of wine. To Flora. And to her mother, who fought like a lioness to keep her. Hear, hear, Dr. Fraser agreed, his Scottish burr warm with approval. Mrs. Dalgleish dabbed at her eyes with her napkin. Dr. McAllister would be so proud, lass. So very proud. Evelyn's throat tightened. She looked down at Flora, who was focused intently on her cake, and felt the weight of the day finally settling onto her shoulders. She'd won. Flora was hers. Legally, permanently, irrevocably hers. The relief should have been overwhelming, absolute, and it was, but threaded through it was exhaustion and the strange hollow feeling that came after a battle ended, when the adrenaline faded and you were left standing in the aftermath wondering what came next. "Mammy, you're not eating," Flora observed, looking up with concern. "I'm just tired, sweetheart." "Then you should go to bed early like me." The child's logic was unassailable. Lady Margaret smiled. "It's out of the mouths of babes. Perhaps we should all retire early tonight. It's been rather an eventful day." After Flora had been tucked in, with extra kisses and reassurances that, yes, she really truly got to stay forever, Evelyn retreated to her bedroom, but sleep felt impossible. Her mind kept replaying the hearing, Catherine's face when the verdict was read, the moment Flora had run to her with complete trust. She was still sitting by the window in her dressing gown when the soft knock came at her door. "Come in," she called, expecting her mother, but it was Perkins who entered, carrying a silver tray with a single envelope. "This just arrived by messenger, Mrs. McAllister. His Grace said it was urgent." Evelyn's heart did something complicated. She took the envelope, recognized James's handwriting immediately. "Thank you, Perkins." After he'd gone, she broke the seal with trembling fingers. I know you must be exhausted, but I couldn't sleep without knowing you're all right. Not just relieved about the verdict, but truly all right. Tomorrow evening at 7, dinner at Rothwell House. You, Flora, and Lady Margaret. I want to do this properly. I want Flora to know me, not as the angry man from the garden or the Duke who helped with the hearing, but as someone who cares about both of you. Please come. Yours. James. Evelyn read it 3 times, each time finding new layers of meaning in the careful words. I want Flora to know me. He wasn't just courting her, he was courting her daughter, asking to be part of their lives in a real, permanent way. The thought terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. Rothwell House was magnificent. Evelyn had known James was wealthy. Dukes generally were, but seeing his London residence in daylight was something else entirely. The townhouse occupied an entire corner of Grosvenor Square, 4 stories of honey-coloured stone with tall windows that gleamed in the fading afternoon light. "It's a palace," Flora breathed, staring up at the facade with wide eyes. "It's a very large house," Evelyn corrected gently. "And the Duke, the man who lives here, he's the one who helped us win in court yesterday. The angry man. He's not angry anymore, sweetheart. He wants to meet you properly." Flora considered this with the seriousness of the very young. "Will he be nice?" "Very nice," Lady Margaret interjected, climbing down from the carriage. "His Grace is a gentleman. Flora, you have nothing to fear." A butler materialized to escort them inside. The entrance hall was everything Evelyn remembered from 5 years ago. Soaring ceilings, marble floors, a grand staircase that swept upward in an elegant curve. But it felt different now, less intimidating, more like home. No, that was too much, too soon. Lady Margaret Ashcroft, Mrs. McAllister, and Miss Flora McAllister, the butler announced as he led them to a drawing room. James stood by the fireplace, and Evelyn's breath caught. He'd dressed simply, dark trousers, grey waistcoat, no coat. His cravat was loosened slightly, his sleeves rolled to his elbows as if he'd been working at something. He looked less like a duke and more like James. When he saw them, his entire face transformed. "You came. You invited us," Evelyn said, managing a smile despite her nerves. His gaze dropped to Flora, who had pressed herself against Evelyn's skirts, suddenly shy. James crouched down immediately, bringing himself to the child's level. The gesture was so natural, so unconsciously kind, that Evelyn's heart clenched. "Hello, Flora," he said gently. "I'm James. We met briefly in the garden a few weeks ago, though I wasn't at my best that day." Flora peeked out from behind Evelyn's skirts. "You were angry." "I was," he admitted. "I'd had a surprise, and I didn't handle it very well." "I'm sorry I frightened you." "It's all right," Flora said, with the easy forgiveness of childhood. "Mammy says grown-ups make mistakes sometimes." "Your mammy is very wise," James smiled. "I heard you were very brave yesterday. The judge said you told him the truth." Flora nodded solemnly. "I told him I wanted to stay with Mammy." "And now you get to forever." James's voice was warm. "I'm very glad about that." He stood, offered his arm to Evelyn. Shall we go in? I've asked Mr. Beaumont to prepare something special. Lady Margaret followed with an amused smile, clearly pleased by the Duke's attentiveness to her daughter. Dinner was a revelation. James had transformed the formal dining room into something almost cozy. Candles instead of harsh gaslight, a smaller table instead of the massive formal one, and, most tellingly, a place setting at the perfect height for a small child. I had the footman bring up a chair from the nursery, James explained, catching Evelyn's surprised look. I thought Flora might be more comfortable. Flora climbed into her special chair with delight. I'm so tall. You are indeed, James agreed seriously. Almost as tall as the Duke of Wellington, I'd wager. Who's that? A very famous soldier, also quite short. Flora giggled, and just like that, the tension in the room dissolved. James was magnificent with her. He asked questions about her favorite things, her cloth rabbit, the stories Evelyn read to her, what she liked to do in the garden. He listened with genuine interest when she told him about Scotland, about the cottage in Glenmore, about how Papa Owen had let her help grind herbs for medicine. Papa Owen sounds like he was a very good papa, James said gently. Flora's face grew serious. He died and went to heaven. Mammy says he's watching over us now. I'm sure he is. James glanced at Evelyn, and I'm sure he's very proud of you for being so brave. After dinner, Flora began to fade, the excitement of the day catching up with her. Why don't I take her to the library? Lady Margaret suggested, reading the situation with her usual acuity. I noticed His Grace has quite the collection of books. Perhaps we can find a story to read. The library is on the second floor, James said. Henderson will show you the way. And Flora, he looked at the drowsy child. There's a stuffed lion on the shelf by the window. His name is Wellington. You may borrow him if you'd like. Flora's eyes lit up despite her tiredness. Really? Really. After they'd gone, Evelyn found herself alone with James for the first time since the courthouse steps. He poured 2 glasses of wine, handed her one, and gestured to the settee by the fire. She's wonderful, he said quietly. Bright, curious, kind. Owen did well by her. We both did. Evelyn sipped her wine. Thank you for tonight, for making her feel welcome, for the special chair and the stuffed lion and all of it. I meant what I said yesterday. I want to be part of your lives, both of you. He paused. If you'll have me. Evelyn set down her glass with trembling hands. James, let me say this first, please. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped. I know I'm asking for something enormous. I know you have every reason to be cautious. I got engaged 2 months after you disappeared. I spent 2 years in an arrangement that dishonored your memory. I failed you in every way that mattered. You didn't. I did. But I'm asking for a chance to do better, to be better. His eyes met hers. I want to court you properly this time. No secrets, no misunderstandings, no waiting for the perfect moment that never comes. I want to spend time with you and Flora. I want her to know me, to trust me, to feel safe with me. And when she does, if she does, I want to ask you to marry me. Evelyn's breath caught. You want to marry me? More than I've ever wanted anything. His voice was rough. But not until Flora is ready. Not until she feels secure. She's lost too much already. Her father, the only home she's ever known, nearly lost you to that woman. I won't rush her, I won't rush you. What if she's never ready? Evelyn asked quietly. What if she can't accept you as part of our family? Then I'll wait. Simple, direct. I'll wait as long as it takes. Because you're worth waiting for, both of you. Evelyn felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. I don't deserve you. You deserve everything, James said fiercely. You deserve a man who fought for you from the beginning, who told you he loved you before you left, who found you when you disappeared instead of giving up and getting engaged to someone else. His voice cracked. I'm not that man, but I'm trying to become him. You already are, Evelyn whispered. The man who fought for Flora even though she wasn't his, who hired investigators and solicitors and brought witnesses from Scotland, who stood in that courtroom like a shield between us and everything that threatened us. That's the man I fell in love with 5 years ago, and that's the man I'm still in love with now. James closed his eyes as if in pain. When he opened them again, they were bright, with unshed tears. Say that again, he whispered. I love you, James Rothwell. I loved you 5 years ago. I love you now. And if you'll be patient with us, with Flora and me, I'd like very much to see where this goes. He kissed her then, soft and desperate and full of 5 years of longing. Evelyn kissed him back with everything she had, all the love she'd tried to deny, all the grief she'd carried, all the hope she'd been afraid to feel. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, James pressed his forehead to hers. "I love you," he said. "I'll say it every day until you believe it." "I believe it," she smiled through her tears. "But you can keep saying it anyway." A throat cleared delicately from the doorway. They sprang apart to find Lady Margaret standing there with Flora in her arms. The child had fallen asleep, clutching the stuffed lion, her red hair a wild tangle against her mother's shoulder. "Someone," Lady Margaret said with barely suppressed amusement, "made it through exactly half a story before exhaustion won." James stood immediately. "I'll have the carriage brought around." "Actually," Evelyn heard herself say, "could we stay a bit longer? I'd like Flora to wake up here. To see that this place, that you are safe." Understanding dawned in James's eyes. "Of course, there's a guest room on the 3rd floor. Henderson can prepare it." 20 minutes later, Flora was tucked into an enormous bed in a room that was probably larger than the entire cottage in Glenmore. She'd stirred briefly when Evelyn laid her down, just long enough to mumble, "Mammy, are we at the Duke's house?" "Yes, sweetheart." "It's nice." "He's nice." And then she was asleep again, the stuffed lion clutched to her chest. Evelyn stood by the bed for a long moment, just watching her daughter breathe. "She'll be all right," James said softly from the doorway. "You both will." "I know." Evelyn turned to face him. "Because you'll make sure of it. Always." The next morning, Flora woke to find herself in an unfamiliar room, filled with soft morning light. Evelyn had slept in a chair beside the bed just in case. She woke when Flora stirred. "Morning, sweetheart." "Mammy?" Flora sat up, looking around with wide eyes. "We're still at the Duke's house." "We are. You fell asleep after dinner, so we stayed the night." A soft knock at the door. James entered, already dressed, carrying a tray with toast and jam and what looked like hot chocolate. "Good morning," he said cheerfully. "I thought you might be hungry." Flora's eyes went wide. "Is that for me?" "If you'd like." He set the tray on the bedside table. "Mr. Beaumont also made porridge, but I remembered your mammy saying you didn't like it much." "I hate porridge," Flora confirmed solemnly. "Then toast it is." James settled into a chair across from the bed. "What would you like to do today?" Flora considered this while nibbling her toast. "Ty, can we see the rest of your house?" "Absolutely. There's a garden out back with a fountain, and stables, if you'd like to see the horses." "Horses?" Flora bounced excitedly, sending toast crumbs flying. And so the morning was spent in a grand tour of Rothwell House. James showed them everything. The library with its thousands of books, the music room with a pianoforte, the gardens with their elaborate fountains and carefully manicured hedges. But it was the stables that captured Flora's heart. "That's Apollo," James said, gesturing to a massive black stallion. "He's rather temperamental. And this," he led them to a smaller stall, "is Daisy. She's much friendlier." Daisy was a gentle grey mare with kind eyes. She whuffed softly when Flora approached, and the child squealed with delight. "Can I pet her?" "Of course. Here, let me show you." James lifted Flora carefully, brought her close enough to reach the mare's nose. "Gently now, just like that." Flora stroked the soft velvet nose with reverent care. "She's so pretty." "She is, and she's very good with children." James glanced at Evelyn. "Perhaps if your mammy agrees, you could come back and ride her sometime. With me supervising, of course." "Really?" Flora's face lit up like the sun. "Really? Mammy, can I?" "Please." Evelyn looked at James, at the careful way he held her daughter, at the gentle patience in his eyes, at the unspoken question in his expression. "Can I be part of this? Can I be part of her life?" "Yes," Evelyn said. "You can come back and ride Daisy?" Flora threw her arms around James's neck with the unself-conscious affection of childhood. "Thank you." James's eyes closed briefly, and Evelyn saw something shift in his expression. Something tender and overwhelmed and almost painfully hopeful. This was what it looked like, she realized. A man falling in love with a child who wasn't his. A duke learning to be a father. Later, after they'd returned to the house, and Flora had been enticed away by Lady Margaret with promises of exploring the music room, James and Evelyn found themselves alone in the garden. "She's wonderful," James said quietly, watching through the window as Flora examined the pianoforte with fascination. "Every moment I spend with her, I understand more why you fought so hard." "She's easy to love," Evelyn agreed. "So are you." He turned to face her fully. "Evelyn, I know I said I'd wait, that I wouldn't rush you or Flora, and I mean that, but I need you to know." He stopped, seemed to gather himself. I know what? That this isn't temporary for me. That when I look at you and Flora, I don't see a woman I'm courting and her child. I see my future, my family, everything I've ever wanted. His voice roughened. I see home. Evelyn's throat tightened. James, I'm not asking for an answer now, he continued quickly. I'm telling you where I stand. So there's no misunderstanding this time. No waiting for the perfect moment. I love you. I love Flora. And whenever you're ready, whether that's tomorrow or a year from now, I want to marry you. I want to be Flora's father. I want to give you both my name, my protection, everything I have. You already protect us, Evelyn whispered. Then let me do it officially. He took her hands. Let me court you properly. Let me prove to Flora that I'm worthy of being in her life. Let me show you both what our future could look like. Evelyn looked up at him. This man who'd loved her for 5 years through death and resurrection. This Duke who'd fought for her daughter like she was his own. This James who looked at her like she was the answer to every question he'd ever asked. All right, she said. All right. Court me. Court us. Show Flora what it means to have someone who'll never leave, never give up, never stop fighting for her. Evelyn rose on her toes, kissed him softly. And when she's ready, when we're both ready, ask me again. James pulled her close, buried his face in her hair. I'll wait as long as it takes. I know you will, Evelyn murmured. That's why I know this is real. 6 months later, Hyde Park in spring was a riot of colour. Evelyn walked slowly along the path near the Serpentine, Flora's hand warm in hers. The child chattered happily about her morning lessons. She'd been learning to read properly now and was inordinately proud of herself. And then I almost read the whole page without help, Flora announced. Miss Peters said I was brilliant. You are brilliant, Evelyn agreed, smiling. Is the Duke coming today? He should be meeting us soon, yes. Flora had taken to calling him the Duke with a child's unconscious formality. Not father, not yet, but with affection and trust that had grown steadily over the past 6 months. James had been patient. He'd visited regularly, never pushing, never demanding more than Flora was ready to give. He'd taught her to ride Daisy. He'd read her stories in his library. He'd attended her 4th birthday celebration and presented her with an enormous stuffed dragon that now shared pride of place with Owen's cloth rabbit. And slowly, carefully, Flora had let him into her heart. There he is, Flora pointed. James stood near the water's edge, hands in his pockets, looking out at the lake. When he heard Flora's voice, he turned, and his face transformed. Good morning, Miss McAllister, he said solemnly, bowing. You look very fine today. Flora giggled. You're silly. I am indeed. It's one of my best qualities. He offered his arm to Evelyn. Walk with me. They fell into step along the path, Flora running ahead to chase ducks, circling back to show them interesting stones or flowers, the picture of childhood joy. She's happy, James observed quietly. She is. Evelyn squeezed his arm. You've been good for her? She's been good for me. He paused and seemed to gather himself. Evelyn, there's something I need to ask you. About Flora. Evelyn's heart stuttered. What about her? He stopped, ran his free hand through his hair. This is harder than I thought it would be. Before Evelyn could respond, Flora came running back. Mammy, there's a puppy over there. Can we go see? In a moment, sweetheart. The Duke wanted to talk to us about something. Flora looked up at James with those wide brown eyes. What is it? James crouched down to her level, as had become his habit. Flora, I need to ask you something important. Is that all right? The child nodded seriously. I care about you and your mammy very much, James began carefully. I like spending time with you both. I like teaching you to ride Daisy and reading you stories and hearing about your lessons. I like that too, Flora said. Good. I'm glad. He took a breath. And I was wondering, how would you feel if I asked your mammy to marry me? If I became part of your family officially? Flora looked between them, weighing the question with the gravity it deserved. Then her small face crumpled slightly. But I already had a papa. The words fell like stones into still water. Evelyn's heart clenched. She started to intervene, but James held up a hand gently. I know you did, he said, voice careful and kind. Your papa Owen. He loved you very much, didn't he? Flora nodded, and tears suddenly pooled in her eyes. I miss him. I know, sweetheart. James's voice was infinitely gentle, and I would never, ever try to replace him. Your papa will always be your papa. No one can change that. Then what would you be? Flora asked, chin wobbling. James was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. I could be something different, not a replacement, just someone else who loves you and wants to take care of you, if that's all right with you. Will you be angry if I still talk about Papa? The question came out small and frightened. Never, James said firmly. I want you to talk about him, to remember him. Your Papa was a good man who loved you very much, and you should never forget that. He paused. In fact, I'd like to hear about him, what he was like, the things he taught you, the way he made you laugh. Would you tell me about him sometime? Flora stared at him, processing this. Really, your Papa was important to you. That makes him important to me. But, Flora's brow furrowed in concentration. Would Papa be sad if I let you be something? Evelyn's throat closed completely. She knelt beside James, pulled Flora into her arms. Oh, sweetheart, she said, voice thick with tears. Your Papa's last words to me were about making sure you were loved and safe and happy. I think, she had to stop, breathe through the ache. I think he would be very happy knowing someone else loves you and wants to take care of you. Flora was quiet for a long moment, tears sliding down her cheeks. Then she looked at James with red-rimmed eyes. You can't be Papa, she said seriously. That was his name. I understand, James replied, equally serious. But maybe, Flora's brow furrowed in thought. In the stories Mammy reads me, there are knights who protect people. Could you be my knight? Something flickered across James's face. Surprise, tenderness, and what looked like the beginning of tears. I would be honored, he said, voice rough, to be your knight, Miss Flora. And knights protect princesses, right? They do. Then you have to protect Mammy, too. Flora's voice grew stronger. Because she gets sad sometimes when she thinks I'm not looking. James glanced at Evelyn, who had her hand pressed to her mouth, tears streaming freely now. I will, he promised Flora. I'll protect both of you. Always. Flora nodded, satisfied with this arrangement. Then, with the mercurial nature of childhood, her face brightened. Okay, you can marry Mammy, but I get to keep talking about Papa. Always, James repeated. And you have to be nice. I will. And, Flora's eyes lit up with sudden inspiration. Can we get a puppy? Despite everything, the tears, the emotion, the weight of the moment, both adults laughed. That, Evelyn managed, wiping her eyes, is a conversation for another day, young lady. Flora sighed dramatically. I tried. She skipped off to chase the ducks again, leaving James and Evelyn kneeling in the grass, both of them crying and laughing at the same time. She called me her knight, James said wonderingly. She did. Evelyn cupped his face with both hands. Because that's what you are, her knight, my knight, the man who fights for us. I love you, he whispered, both of you. So much it terrifies me. Then it's a good thing knights are supposed to be brave, Evelyn said softly. James laughed, pulled her close, kissed her with all the love and hope and promise he'd been holding back. When they finally broke apart, Flora was watching them with frank curiosity. Are you kissing again? She called. Yes, Evelyn called back, laughing. Because you love each other? Very much. Flora considered this. When you marry, will I have to call him Papa? James and Evelyn exchanged glances. You can call me whatever feels right to you, James said gently. Knight, James, or nothing at all. It doesn't matter what you call me, as long as you know I love you. Flora nodded, satisfied. Then her face brightened again. If I call you Knight, can I have a horse? Knights have horses. You already ride Daisy, James pointed out. But I want my own horse. Her small one. Evelyn started to protest, but James laughed. We'll see, when you're a bit bigger. That's what Mammy always says, Flora grumbled. But she was smiling. She ran off again, and James turned to Evelyn. Will you marry me? He asked quietly. Not someday. Not when the time is perfect. Now. Soon. As soon as we can arrange it. Yes, Evelyn said simply. Yes, yes, yes. He kissed her again, soft and sure and full of promise. And somewhere in the distance, Flora's laughter rang out, bright and clear and full of joy. The sound of a child who felt safe, loved, home. 1 year later, the gardens at Rothwell House blazed with late summer flowers, roses and lavender and hollyhocks that Flora loved to hide behind during games of chase. Evelyn sat on a stone bench beneath an old oak tree, one hand resting on the gentle swell of her belly, watching her daughter run shrieking with laughter, while James pursued her with exaggerated slowness. "I'm going to catch you," he called, his coat discarded somewhere on the grass, his cravat loosened, looking nothing like a duke and everything like a man who'd found his purpose. "No, you won't." Flora darted behind a hedge, her red hair bright against the green. At 5 years old, she'd grown like a weed, all long limbs and boundless energy. A year of marriage had softened some of the sharp edges grief had carved into both of them. James smiled more easily now. Evelyn slept through the night without nightmares. They'd built something new together, not a replacement for what they'd lost, sir, but something different and precious in its own right. "She's getting faster," Lady Margaret observed, settling onto the bench beside her daughter. "How soon he won't have to pretend to be slow." Evelyn smiled, her hand moving in slow circles over her stomach. "She's been asking if the baby will be able to play chase when it's born." "And what did you tell her?" "That it will take a few years, but yes, eventually." Evelyn's smile widened. "She's already planning to teach it everything she knows." "I'm terrified." Lady Margaret laughed. "As well you should be. That child has enough determination for 3. They sat in comfortable silence, watching James scoop Flora up and spin her around while she squealed with delight. "Are you happy?" Lady Margaret asked quietly. Evelyn considered the question, really considered it. Happiness had seemed impossible once, something that belonged to the girl she'd been before the shipwreck. But sitting here in the sunshine with her family around her, with new life growing inside her, she found the answer came easily. "Yes," she said, "I am." James brought Flora over, both of them flushed and breathless. "She's too fast for me," he declared dramatically. "I concede defeat." "I won," Flora crowed. "That you did." He set her down, then held out his hand to Evelyn. "Walk with me." She took his hand, let him pull her to her feet, a bit more carefully now, given her condition. They left Flora with Lady Margaret, who immediately began a serious discussion about which flowers would be best for making fairy crowns, and wandered toward the rose garden. "How are you feeling?" James asked, his hand finding the small of her back in that protective gesture he'd adopted since she'd told him about the baby. "Tired, happy, enormous," she smiled. "So all the usual things. You're not enormous, you're perfect. You're biased, thoroughly." He pulled her close, pressed a kiss to her temple. "Have I told you today that I love you? Only twice. You're falling behind. Then allow me to remedy that." He stopped walking, turned her to face him. "I love you, Evelyn Rothwell. I love the way you look at Flora like she hung the moon. I love the way you've made this massive house feel like a home. I love watching you grow our child and knowing that in a few months, our family will be even bigger." Evelyn's eyes stung. "I love you too, even when you wake me at dawn, because you're too excited about being a father to sleep." "That was one time. It was 3 times this week." James had the grace to look sheepish. "I'm enthusiastic. You're impossible." But she was smiling. "Just and I wouldn't change a thing." They stood like that for a moment, wrapped in each other and the warm afternoon, and Evelyn thought about the girl she'd been, the one who'd boarded a ship 5 years ago with dreams of a simple proposal, a happy marriage, a life that made sense. That girl had drowned in the North Sea, but the woman who'd risen from those waves, scarred, stronger, carrying the weight of loss and love in equal measure, that woman had found her way home, not to the life she'd planned, but to something better, something real. Flora's laughter rang across the garden, bright and clear. Lady Margaret's voice joined it, both of them giggling over some shared joke. James pulled Evelyn closer, one hand moving to rest on her belly where their child grew. "What are you thinking?" She smiled against his shoulder. "That the sea took everything from me once, but somehow impossibly it gave me everything back." "Not everything," he murmured. "We lost 5 years." "No." She looked up at him, certain and clear. "We lost 5 years of one story, but we gained a different one with Flora in it, one where we both learned what really matters." "And what's that?" "That love isn't about perfect timing or fairy tale endings. It's about fighting for each other, about building something together from broken pieces." She touched his face gently. "It's about coming home, even when the journey is longer and stranger than you ever imagined." James caught her hand, pressed a kiss to her palm, to the finger that no longer wore Owen's silver ring, but a gold band etched with roses that matched his own. "Then I'm glad the journey brought you back to me, however long it took." From the garden, Flora called out, "Mammy, Papa, come see what Grandmother and I made." Papa. Flora had started using the word 3 months ago, tentatively at first, usually night in private, but my papa, when speaking to others about James. Then one morning at breakfast, she'd asked him to pass the jam and called him Papa as naturally as breathing. James had gone very still, his eyes bright with emotion, and said simply, "Of course, sweetheart." Now she used both interchangeably, night when it was just family, a private endearment, Papa when the world was watching, both names given freely, with love, without forgetting the man who'd come before. "We're coming," Evelyn called back. They walked toward their daughter together, hand in hand. Flora stood beside an elaborate construction of flowers and twigs that might have been a crown or a bird's nest or possibly a dragon. It was hard to tell. "It's beautiful," James said with absolute sincerity. "It's for the baby," Flora explained. "When it's born, it can wear it." "That's very thoughtful," Evelyn managed, trying not to laugh. "And I've been practicing my letters," Flora continued, warming to her subject, "so I can teach the baby to read. And I asked Mr. Beaumont to teach me to make those biscuits you like, Mammy, so the baby will know how to make them too." "You're going to be a wonderful big sister," James said, crouching to her level. Flora's face grew serious. "Will the baby remember Papa Owen?" The question caught them both off guard. Evelyn knelt carefully beside James. "No, sweetheart. The baby won't have known him." "Then I'll tell them about him," Flora said with the decisive certainty of childhood. "I'll tell them how he was a doctor and helped people, and how he loved me even though I cried a lot when I was little, and how he gave me my rabbit." She looked between them. "Is that all right?" James's voice was rough when he answered. "That's more than all right. That's perfect." "Good," Flora nodded, satisfied. Then, with typical 5-year-old logic, "Can the baby have a puppy when it's born?" "Flora," Evelyn started. "Can I have a puppy?" Flora tried. "No," Evelyn and James said in unison. Flora sighed dramatically. "You both always say that." "We do," James agreed, eyes twinkling. "It's one of the many things married people agree on." "What else do you agree on?" "That you should probably go wash your hands before tea," Evelyn said. "Oh, you've got mud all over them." Flora looked down at her hands with surprise, as if the mud had appeared by magic. "Oh, I'll go ask Mrs. Henderson for the good soap, the one that smells like lavender." She scampered off toward the house. Lady Margaret rose from her bench, brushing flower petals from her skirts. "I'll make sure she doesn't flood the washroom again." She paused, looked at her daughter and son-in-law with warm eyes. "You've built something beautiful here, both of you." After she'd gone, James helped Evelyn to her feet. "She's right, you know. This—" He gestured at the garden, the house, the life they'd created. "It's more than I ever dreamed possible. Even with the chaos, the mud, the constant negotiations about puppies. Especially with all of that." He pulled her close, careful of her belly. "Do you remember what you said to me the night of the custody hearing? That you didn't know what would happen after." "I remember." "I knew," he said quietly. "Even then, I knew. I knew I'd love you until my last breath. I knew I'd fight for you and Flora until there was nothing left to fight. I knew that whatever came next, I wanted to face it with you." "And now?" Evelyn asked. "Now I get to wake up every morning knowing you're mine, that Flora calls me Papa, that there's a baby coming who'll never know a world where we're not together." His hand moved to her belly, spreading wide and protective. "Now I get to live the future I'd given up hoping for." Evelyn stood on her toes, as much as her condition allowed, and kissed him softly. "I love you, James Rothwell. My knight, my husband, my home. I love you, Evelyn Rothwell. My ghost, made real. My second chance. My everything." They stood like that for a long moment, wrapped in sunlight and love and the life they'd fought so hard to build. From inside the house, they heard Flora's voice. "Mrs. Henderson, did you know I'm going to be a big sister? I'm going to teach the baby everything." Mrs. Henderson's patient reply, "I'm sure you will, Miss Flora. Now let's get those hands properly clean." James and Evelyn looked at each other and laughed. "Ready to go back inside?" he asked. "Always," she said, "as long as you're with me. Then you'll never be alone again." Hand in hand, they walked back toward Rothwell House, toward their daughter, and their life and the future they'd built from the wreckage of the past. The gardens settled into evening quiet. Roses turned gold in the fading light. Somewhere in the distance, a bird sang its evening song. And in the library window, a small red-haired girl pressed her face to the glass, waving enthusiastically at her parents. They waved back, home. Finally, impossibly, wonderfully home.